that's our, we have people coming over on Saturday, and I wanted to get done by then, but I don't think it's gonna happen.
Yeah, we're good. Is the mic on? All right. Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to call to order this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Is it really on? Will the clerk please call the roll? Oh, now I can hear him. Here. Here.
Here.
Great. Well, welcome, everyone. Apologies about the sound level as we get used to this evening. First, kickoff, we don't have any changes to our agenda tonight. Looking at our agenda moving forward, next week on Wednesday, June 12th, we are at the City Council meeting in the auditorium on Maple Avenue. We will begin with a presentation on the administrative regs regarding small cell wireless regulations, followed by a public hearing. Our voting session that evening will be a single reading ordinance approving a contract for the 2019 Lunch and Learn program, a single reading ordinance approving a contract for mentoring services. Our work session that evening, we'll have three, will be the Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan update, a discussion of requests to donate real property to the city, which is 6507 Kansas Lane, and a discussion of committee appointments. On Wednesday, June 19th, between 6 and 7:15 p.m., before our official meeting, we will have a joint meeting of the City Council, Recreation Department, and Recreation Committee. This will be held in the Azalea Room, and it is open to the public. Our regular meeting will start at 7:30 in the auditorium on Maple Avenue. Our voting session that night is tentatively a resolution regarding requests to donate property to the city, a single reading ordinance awarding FY20 community grants, resolutions providing for appointments to committees, and a resolution appointing the Youth Council Advisor. Our work session that evening will be small cell wireless regulations and an overview of the tree ordinance review process and tree canopy goals. On Wednesday, June 26th, and on Wednesday, July 3rd, the City Council will not be meeting. And then Thursday, July 4th, I hope everyone participates in the Independence Day celebrations, and city offices and facilities will be closed. We will then come back and meet on Wednesday, July 10th. That evening, we'll have 4 work sessions so far scheduled. Our Legal Services Review Advisory Group report, they will present. We'll have a discussion of housing and economic development, a discussion of the Parking Management Task Force, and a discussion of MML legislative action requests. And that will take us to mid-July. All right. Now, tonight, the beginning of June, we have 3 proclamations. The first one I will read is regarding Immigrant Heritage Month. And this one states, whereas as a nation of immigrants, the United States of America has benefited from the culture, ideas, skills, and abilities of those who have come here to work, to learn, and to find freedom and shelter. And whereas in Tacoma Park, we have many first and second generation immigrants as our neighbors, and whereas the city has a long history of welcoming immigrants and working to build a caring, inclusive, and strong community which celebrates its diversity, and whereas in recent years, as more immigrants fear deportation and others may be viewed with mistrust, it is important more than ever to maintain our Tacoma Park values. Now, therefore, I, Kate Stewart, Mayor of the City of Tacoma Park, Maryland, on behalf of the council, residents, and staff, proclaim June as Immigrant Heritage Month in Tacoma Park and encourage all to come together and recommit ourselves to be an inclusive and welcoming community that upholds the rights of all people to live with dignity and respect. This week is also Chesapeake Bay Week, June 1st through the 9th, and I thank my colleague, Councilwoman Davala, for bringing this to our attention. I'll read this one quickly. Whereas the Chesapeake Bay is the largest and at one time the most productive estuary in the United States, spanning 6 states and the District of Columbia. And whereas the City of Tacoma Park City Council has in the past years recognized that the Chesapeake Bay watershed is an extraordinary and vital natural resource and ecosystem, a seafood source of major economic importance, as well as an integral part of Maryland's history and heritage. And whereas the Chesapeake Bay on the livelihood recreational activities. And whereas living within Chesapeake Bay watershed with its rich history and environmental significance remind us all the responsibility we have to protect the bay and our local stream from runoff, pollutants, and litter. And whereas the City of Tacoma Park and its residents take these responsibilities seriously, as evidenced by the city's innovative stormwater management program and forward-thinking environmental initiatives such as Safe Grow, the ban on polystyrene, the plastic bag ban, the recently adopted ban on plastic straws, and non-governmental and volunteer efforts such as the Friends of Sligo Creek Stewardship of the Watershed. And whereas the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments has annually recognized the importance of Chesapeake Bay Awareness Week, has encouraged its members to do the same. Now, therefore, I, Kate Stewart, Mayor of the City of Tacoma Park, Maryland, on behalf of the residents, council, and staff, do hereby proclaim June 1st through 9th, 2019 as Chesapeake Bay Awareness Week in Tacoma Park, and urge all our residents to recognize the importance of protecting and cherishing the Chesapeake. Our final proclamation tonight, and this one I saved for last. And I just want to thank the residents who are with us this evening, who have worked tirelessly on this issue. And for us, as I read this, to really take a moment to remember those who have been taken from us all too soon. This one is regarding Gun Violence Awareness Day in Tacoma Park, Friday, June 7th, 2019. Whereas every day, 100 Americans are killed by gun violence. And whereas firearms are the second leading cause of death for American children and teens. And whereas mayors and law enforcement officers know their communities best, are the most familiar with the local criminal activity and how to address it, and are best positioned to understand how to keep their residents safe. And whereas orange is the color that Hydra Pendleton's friends wore in her honor when she was shot and killed in Chicago at the age of 15, just 1 week after performing at President Obama's second inaugural parade in 2013. And whereas hunters wear orange to announce themselves to other hunters when out in the woods, and orange is a color that symbolizes the value of human life. And whereas wearing orange on June 7th and on other days in June will raise awareness about gun violence and honor the lives and lost human potential of Americans stolen by gun violence. And whereas this year we honor and remember some of the most recent victims of gun violence, including those who were shot and killed at a Virginia Beach municipal building on Friday, May 31st. We remember Lakita Brown, Michelle Missy Ryan Cox, Tara Welch Gallagher, Mary Louise Gale, Alexander Gustav, Catherine A. Nixon, Joshua Hardy, Herbert Burt Snelling, Robert Bobby Williams, Robert H. Nelton, Christopher Kelly Rapp. And whereas in our own community, we experienced a loss from gun violence from severe, his name's not on the paper. It's the wrong one. And we are thank everyone who is here this evening. Now, therefore, I, Kate Stewart, Mayor of the City of Tacoma Park, Maryland, on behalf of the council, residents, and staff, declare June 7th to be Gun Violence Awareness Day in Tacoma Park. I encourage all residents to support local efforts to prevent the tragic effects of gun violence and to honor and value human lives. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for coming this evening. And I hope everyone can join us on Saturday between 10 and 11 at the Veterans Square in downtown Silver Spring. So, thank you. All right. Thank you very much. I was not anticipating that. And I just want to say it's Cyrell Briscoe was the young man who lost his life, who lived in Tacoma Park over Memorial Day from gun violence, and we will miss him in our community. All right, moving on, we have public comments on voting items now. Our first voting item tonight is a second reading ordinance reestablishing the Safe Roadways Committee as a complete Safe Streets Committee. Any public comments on that? Okay. Next, we have a single reading ordinance awarding a contract for a surface restoration of the community center pedestrian bridge. Any public comments on that? All right. Seeing none, we'll move into our voting session. The first is a second reading ordinance reestablishing the Safe Roadways Committee as the complete Safe Streets Committee. This is a second reading ordinance. Would someone like to move it? Councilwoman Costick moved it. Do I have a second? Councilmember Gofar. It's going to be a long night. Seconded. Any questions, conversation, discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk call the roll? This is a second reading ordinance.
Councilmember Costick. Councilmember Seaman. Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Searcy. Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Next is a single reading ordinance awarding a contract for surface restoration of the community center pedestrian bridge. Would someone like to move the ordinance? Councilmember Siemens, do I have a second? Councilmember DeBala, any questions on this one? All right, seeing none, it's a single reading ordinance. Will the clerk call the vote?
Councilmember Tovar. Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Costick. Councilmember Seaman. Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Searcy. Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right, now we will move to any other public comments people may have. Please come to the microphone, state your name, and you're to have 3 minutes. Because we're not in the regular chambers, I'll just kind of give a wave if somebody starts to go close to 3 minutes. Please.
Thank you. I'm Andrea Chambly of Silver Spring since 1994, and I'm here to watch the proclamation for the gun violence awareness, and I want to thank you very much for leading on this very important issue. You talked about the numbers, and the number of people killed or injured by gun violence every day is almost 6 Americans every day. And those numbers don't include me. My husband, John McNamara, was at the Annapolis Capitol on the day a mass shooter broke through the glass window and killed John, Rob, Gerald, Rebecca, and Wendy. And as time goes on, I find out more and more about what happened, and it just gets more upending and disturbing and horrifying. And there's nothing I can do now that would change that. No law we can pass that would save my husband. But there are things that we can do to prevent this from happening to any of you, and that's my goal for the action ahead. I wear his press pass just about every day to remind myself that he's with me. So thank you for taking a lead in this. I read that there were 43 mass shootings in the United States in May, the month of May. 43. And that doesn't count all the people who are lost every day in other circumstances that just don't take up front page news anymore, because there are so many. And I applaud your efforts to reduce this terrible scourge. Thank you.
Any other public comments this evening? No, Mr. Huebner, you can come up.
Sorry, and good luck. I mean, God bless you. Excuse me, Paul Huebner, Ward 3, Avenue. Totally different subject. Recently, many residents, including me, have experienced the effect of the new outdoor cafe permits. When this legislation was first proposed, I thought it was a good idea. I thought of Roscoe's, the food co-op, and the few tables in front of the Spring Hill Bakery. But now the full effect has surfaced. This administration, this council, this administration and this council is giving more and more of our public land and even revenue-producing property to private businesses for private profit. The city is permitting private enterprises to fence off parking spaces, denying residents the revenue and parking. You're allowing profit-focused enterprises to even fence off areas from curbs to sidewalks, creating a safety hazard by forcing drivers to walk in the street after parking their cars. There should be no confiscation of public land for private profits. My perception is that this administration is giving away public land in Old Town and at the Junction parking lot in a 99-year lease, essentially giving it away. NDC offered to charge the co-op $45 per square foot for our land, and the council hasn't objected. Yet the city allows the use of public property by businesses for free. As I look at this phenomenon, these grants are costing citizens money or land on two fronts: lost revenue and the exorbitant cost of staff from multiple departments. 3 different departments handled this: housing and community development, planning and economic development. So we get a double whammy, nay, a triple budget whammy: lost revenue, staff time and cost, and administrative overhead. If public land is to be used for private profit, then the residents should share those profits. And now, most recently, the city staff conjured up another mission to potentially close Laurel Avenue and cede it for more private use and private profit. Thankfully, citizens were heard. And after the fact, much like the outdoor cafe permit, they stopped this idea. Just last night, Tacoma Beverage had 5 times more people outside than inside their restaurant. Do not be confused. These are businesses.
30 seconds.
If they are profiting, then so should we for the use of our land. This council must make a decision and take a stand. Do you represent the staff or the residents, the businesses or the people?
Thank you. Any other public comments this evening? Yeah. We're in general already, Priscilla, so. We were moving fast tonight. Careful.
I just want to say thank you for coming to Ward 6 to have this meeting. I know it's inconvenient for the setting all this audio-visual stuff up, but I appreciate it. And I also, and the Friends of the Tacoma Park Rec Center, appreciate the support that you've given us. And I think it's looking good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comments tonight?
I don't have anything prepared because I've been running around like a crazy person. My name is Danielle Veith. I'm from Tacoma Park, live on Poplar Avenue. And just thank you so much to the council for, I think this is the 4th year you've done the proclamation, and it really means a lot. I'm the chapter leader for the whole state of Maryland, but this is my home, and it means a lot to me that you do take action on this issue as possible. I'm here with my daughter, Ella, and I have I have a son also, and this is why we do this, to keep them safe. And so I just would want to mention to everyone tonight that if you, there is the event for the Montgomery County Local Group in Silver Spring. It's 10 to 11 for the walk. They're doing a unity walk. They have 28 community partners from across the county working on issues of gun violence in terms of hate crimes and populations that are disproportionately impacted by gun violence because of race or religion or LGBTQ community. So there's that, and then from 11 to 12 there's like a family-friendly kind of festival sort of thing that they're doing with lots of kids activities. And we have, I think 14 events total around the state, so people can find other ones. We're doing 2 in Baltimore City for trying to plant gardens there to help prevent crime by beautification projects. And so the way you can find out about events is by texting the word orange to 64433. And for anyone who wants to learn more about getting involved in our organization, you can text the word ready, like I'm ready to do something about this nonsense, to 64433. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Any other public comments this evening? Yeah.
My name is Jared Hughes. I live on Elm Avenue, and I too wanted to thank you all for your leadership in proclaiming this gun violence prevention weekend and month. and for all of you for wearing some sort of orange and participating. As Danielle said, our big push is in Montgomery County is here in Silver Spring at the Veterans Plaza on Saturday at 10 o'clock. If you wanted to have a more contemplative moment of silence, you can go to Washington National Cathedral, which will be bathed in orange light for the second time in as many years. And the Bourdon bell, the largest bell in the city, I believe, it's 12 tons. It can be heard for miles, will ring 109 times, representing every life that is lost on average every single day in this country because of gun violence. I encourage people who would like to get involved, as Danielle said, to either text to those numbers, or you can visit wearorange.org and put in your zip code, and you'll be told where you can find other activities around this week. And certainly go and visit Moms Demand Action, and momsdemand.org, I think is the website, and you can get involved there. So I just wanted to thank you all again for your leadership, and particularly Andrea for your courage and your gift of time and presence. You don't have to do what you do, and our movement is so much stronger because of it. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Okay, seeing none, we will move on now. Again, thank you for everyone who visited tonight. We'll next move on to our council comments. Since I don't have my normal thing up here to call on people, how about we just start? Councilmember Kovar, are you ready? Sorry.
I just spilled my drink, though. Is this working? Yeah.
Good.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who spoke, and in particular the people who spoke about gun violence, and happy that we have folks here advocating on behalf of that cause. Just a few things I wanted to mention. I did hear from our Public Works Director, who's not here tonight, that it looks like, and we're just trying to pin down some timing and details, that the section of the sidewalk on Philadelphia Avenue that's been in bad shape for a long time, right along by Silver Spring Intermediate Park across the street from Montgomery College, is slated to be repaired, I think next week. And so that's excellent news for people who have strollers, or just people who use wheelchairs, or honestly anybody who wants to walk along there. So I'll be circulating more information about that to the lists in Ward 1 when I get it from Public Works. But that's excellent news. I'm glad to hear that. The mayor mentioned the gentleman who sadly lost his life, and there were several vigils in his honor recently, and the police were involved there. But just in a slightly different point, I wanted to mention that in the park area behind Darwin, over in that area, people are continuing to gather. It's not connected at this point to the vigil, but one of the residents sent me a photograph of the area just yesterday, and there was a burned copy of some algebra tests. And so while we can maybe sympathize with that, it's not something connected to the vigil. And so it's one of these things where park police and our police sort of have joint coverage. And I have heard from the chief, and said they were try to have more patrols there. But I think it's something that we need to be aware of, because for the young children in the area, it can be an intimidating situation if there's large gatherings of people there, and sometimes engaging in illicit behavior. So I just want to mention that. And then I think you'll be talking later about the SSI Park process, so I'll leave that for now. And I think I will there. Thank you.
Councilman DeBala.
Just a couple of things. There we go. Just a couple of things really quickly on the Public Works front. Work progresses on Lincoln Avenue sidewalks. The Flexipave is in, and now there's still some backfilling, so that's pretty close to done. And the stormwater contractor has still some major work to do. There are facility parts that need to arrive before the work can be completed. I'm told by Public Works that they're ordered and that they won't be in for a couple of months. So that's the bad news. But the good news is that the other part's almost done.
Moving right along.
Yeah, so thank you, all the Lincoln Avenue neighborhood folks, for your patience. The other thing I wanted to say was the Crossroads Farmers Market is a great place to hang out. I had a really good set of office hours there today. I had a great lunch, met some very fine people, and I encourage you all to get out there on Wednesdays. And that's it, I think, for me today.
Great. Councilmember Seaman? Nothing? Councilman Pearson?
I don't know, I just kept moving until it worked out.
That works. That works too. Good evening, everyone. First, I just want to again reiterate my heartfelt sadness for the level of gun violence in our nation. I was watching the news, and the person said it's another random act of violence, and I'm like, okay, I'm a numbers person, and when something happens over and over and over and over, is it really random or is it a trend, right? And so it is hard to know that this is a growing trend in our nation, and yet leaders are not brave enough to do something about it. And so I appreciate all of the hard work that people are doing to bring awareness. I think it's critical for us to continue to push the issue at a federal level, to force our leaders to do something. If they don't, we need to pick new leaders. And I don't want to preach, but that's just where we are, because there are other places in the world where this happens one time and action happens. And this has happened, this is a perpetual problem in our nation, and yet we've seen nothing happen. Babies have been killed. Seniors have been killed. People going to work have been killed, and yet we've seen nothing happen. So on that note, thank you all so much for coming out. Now I'm going to get to Public Works, because I think that's a growing trend. Daryl and Ian have been working, man, and I appreciate all that they do. So for Ward 6 residents, the shield, the LED light shield requests are starting to be addressed. So we are seeing those shields go up. So for my colleagues, you know, we're kind of doing this stuff in cycles. So, you know, if they're putting up the shields here, they'll eventually make it to your areas. Glenside sidewalk is moving along quite nicely. It's lovely to have emails saying, I took a walk on the sidewalk and I love it. So I want to, again, send my appreciation for Ian and Daryl, who have been so responsive to residents' questions about a number of things, from trimming back trees that are now, you know, covering the sidewalk, to, you know, dealing with other matters with driveways and things. It's just been super responsive, and this has been a very painless exercise. So thank you so much for that. And lastly, I want to thank Priscilla and the Friends of the Rec for organizing a meeting on Monday. Was it Monday? with County Council Member Gabe Abernas, and it was a really wonderful discussion. I was very excited to hear his willingness to think of ways in which we can collaboratively, the city, along with the county, along with trying to even think through private partners to make the development of the rec center a reality. And so just knowing his willingness to come in and take a tour and work with his colleagues to make sure that we're able to move this rec center forward was really, really wonderful. So thank you so much, and Friends of the Rec for organizing that event on Monday. Thank you.
Great. Councilman Kostick?
Thank you. I want to, first of all, just reiterate my thanks to the residents who are working so hard on the issue of gun violence, and I appreciate Councilmember Searcy's comments related to this. I think this is such an important issue, and it's so important that we have people here working locally and throughout the state and the country to address this issue. I wanted to make an announcement related to dockless e-scooters and e-bikes. The county has a pilot program that just went into effect. They're expanding their original pilot that was related just to the dockless bikes. And that just went into effect about a week ago, not quite. But it seems like they're still shifting out some specific details related to it. And we can expect to see more e-scooters and e-bikes in Tacoma Park probably in the coming months as this rolls out. I had a chance on Saturday to go to one of the training sessions that they have to give people a chance to try out an e-scooter in a safe place and get some safety tips, because they found a lot of the research shows when people are having accidents and crashes with the scooters, it's because they're not familiar with using them, and it's not something we may have grown up using. So it's a good opportunity to go out and test it out. I'll admit I was a little bit terrified the first time I went around, and it seemed like I was going a lot faster than I was, and by the end I felt much more comfortable. So I encourage people to look for those sessions. Part of the agreement that the county has with the two companies that are providing the scooters and the bikes is that they will have regular training sessions over the coming months. So there should be future opportunities as well if you're interested in testing those out. And then finally, the Ward 3 Day at the Crossroads Farmers Market is going to be next Wednesday, June 12th. And I look forward to meeting people there around 11 o'clock, and we'll take a little tour of the market and then just enjoy lunch together there. Hope to see you. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Councilwoman DeVallo, you had something else?
Oh, it was on LED lights today on the 500 block of Elm Avenue. There was a subcontractor changing out the funky old ones that had been skipped. So that's, again, progress. I've had several people ask me when that was going to happen, so that if they're already up to Ward 2, then they're almost done. Okay. Yeah.
Great. I have a couple of announcements tonight. One, a number of us were at the SHA Vision meeting last night, and there's another one on Monday evening as well. Though Councilman Kostick and I were emailing with the city manager that even though it was a fairly good turnout, it was not very representative of our community.
Pretty white. It was pretty white.
It was pretty white. Pretty older and homeowners, and this is supposed to be a community visioning process, and so I think Councilman Kostick actually volunteered to write the letter that we'll just send to SHA, thanking them for the process they're going through, but also encouraging them to maybe include other meetings that would be more convenient for a broader section of our community to attend. So we'll be doing that.
And in the meantime, there's the survey.
There is a survey, there's definitely a survey, and at SHA, even last night, I know some residents had mentioned to me that they talked to the staff who were there last night, and they acknowledged and said they were open to hearing other ideas and things to do. Next, I want to thank Tacoma Park Mobilization, their environmental committee that held a meeting on Sunday afternoon on learning about drawdown and how we can combat climate change. It was a very interesting session, and I just want to thank Tacoma Mobilization's Environment Committee for putting that on. On Monday night, continuing on climate change, I will be at University Park in Prince George's on a panel on a community conversation on climate change. It will be mostly Prince George's officials and residents, and we were invited because of all the awesome things we do to fight climate change in Tacoma Park. So the mayor of University Park asked if I could come and talk about all the efforts that we have done over the past years and have a conversation. So I will be there Monday night and not at the SHA meeting.
And there's the 350.
Oh, I didn't have that. Do you have?
No, I thought it was
We
going to be
can-
in the notes.
no, yeah.
Yeah, this Saturday, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
This Saturday, 350.org and a bunch of other local organizations.
Can you speak a little louder?
Including the City of Tacoma Park, and have Climate Festival this Saturday at Piney Branch Elementary. Thank you.
That's right.
Thank you. And then finally, I just wanted to say again, thank you to our police department. There's been a lot going on the last couple of weeks, and particularly with the passing of Cyril and all that our police department has done to help the community find space to grieve and hold vigils in his honor. I just want to thank them very much for their continued work, and also thank the residents who do live in the vicinity. Thank you for their patience as part of our community, and our whole community grieves this loss. So I'll turn it over to our city manager. Yeah, good.
My apologies. I meant to just mention two other announcement things. On June 18th, which is the Tuesday at 7 p.m. at Montgomery College's Cultural Arts Center on Georgia Avenue, there's the next first meeting of the charrette connected to the new math science building that's being planned for the Tacoma Park campus of Montgomery College. This and future meetings will be focused on the exterior of the building, so that's at 7 p.m. And then on Wednesday, the 19th, that's Ward 1 Day at Crossroads Market, so I just wanted to put in a plug for that, too. Thank you.
All right, thank you. For my city manager comments today, I do want to start out and speak, as the folks are here still, on the gun violence issue. The recent shootings were pretty upsetting to our staff for several reasons. I know at least one staff person had a good friend who was in the building at at the Virginia Beach Municipal Building where the shootings occurred during that time. We have a number of our recreation staff and police staff who are familiar with Mr. Briscoe, have known him a long time. And so I think, we don't have to be the direct person to also grieve or be scared and wonder how that affects us. I was at the COG Chief Administrative Officers Retreat today, and it was cut short a little bit for a special gathering to talk about building security and those kinds of things, because the subject has to keep coming up. One of the things that I heard that was a good idea that I'm going to pursue is mental health first aid training for our staff. And so I thought that was something that, I've heard a million things about how you put more cameras in and more swipe cards, but this one I thought was something that seemed to be helpful to some of the other jurisdictions, and so that's something that I'll be looking into. And it is really hard to know all of these and to keep your staff focused while they're also practicing active shooter exercises, and then seeing, sometimes that doesn't even matter. And it happens so fast and so often. I'd like to talk for a moment about the small cell administration regulations process. So next week, June 12th, we'll have
council meeting, which will have a presentation by Mark Del Bianco, who's our consulting attorney, who's worked with city staff to develop the small cell antenna regulations. There will also be a public hearing that evening on the matter. The regulations are posted, it's been advertised in the newsletter. People can put comments online, or they can send them in any other way. On June 19th, the council will hold a work session to discuss the administrative regulations, ask any remaining questions of Mr. Del Bianco, and provide feedback to staff. The next day, June 20th, I'm considering my last day to receive comments. That gives a time for people to have heard and digested the presentation, and have the council have their comments. This also allows me enough time to be able to make whatever changes I think are appropriate given the comments, provide notice of the final administrative regulations in the July newsletter, and have a July 15th effective date. So I'm looking forward to comments, and there's quite a lot of information on our website. Just type in cell antennas and you'll get it. I'll piggyback just a minute. There is information on the Montgomery County, oh, yes? There's an online form, yes. And the online form is easiest for me to use, but I'm not exclusive. As Ms. Costick mentioned, there is a Montgomery County dockless e-bike and e-scooter pilot underway. We found out just before it started, so we didn't announce it last week. But there is information on the county website, we're trying to get out information through all of our social media channels about educating residents on safe and appropriate use. I was really glad to see that they had the training. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but I was on a walk from downtown Silver Spring to the DC Maryland boundary stone on Maple Avenue as part of a different project right when the training was going on, because I wanted to practice the e-scooter stuff as well. We did have staff attending the COG Dockless Bike and Scooter Share Workshop on May 30th to learn about and discuss the upcoming changes, and we're keeping on top of it. So I appreciate the staff doing that. Councilmember Kovar mentioned the Silver Spring Intermediate Neighborhood Park Improvement Plan. This is the park that's on Philadelphia at Chicago. This is a project that's been going on by Park and Planning for some time. A lot of information is on the Park and Planning website that shows the different options for it. There were there's a lot of community outreach and meetings. I'm not sure exactly why, but the timing didn't really work to have a presentation to council about it, which would be the normal process so that the council can weigh in. And so we're still looking to identify how do we best comment on those things. I haven't heard something that seemed to indicate that there was a particular significant problem, but I do know that at the discussion this past week that there was some community concern about some aspects of it. And so that's something that I think, Councilmember Kovar, I'm going to need to work with you to determine if there's something else that we want to a way to weigh in on that.
I'll just mention briefly, I did attend that most recent meeting, and most of it, the group that gathered, there was probably, I would guess, maybe 30 or so people were supportive, and a lot of work was done to preserve the trees and try to increase safety for young children and so on. One concern that emerged was that there were some people who wanted to retain the two existing tennis courts, and the alternative, and this is the one that the county park group is proposing, is to turn one of those into a futsal court, which is the smaller 4-on-4 soccer kind of thing. And there were strong opinions on both sides on that, and that's something that we can talk about more perhaps. And then the additional thing is a big part of one reason why a lot of people support some improvements being made there is because water tends to flow down Boston Avenue during heavy rains, and those who've been to the park know that at that one end of it, it can be very damp and boggy, and so they've taken steps and are planning to take additional steps through the design work to try to address that. That wasn't really covered in this meeting. They talked about hearing more from WSSC after they had done some more examinations of it, but I think that would also be another piece we might potentially want to comment on, but I don't have the answer to that yet. So.
Okay. I do have also in my notes, the design meetings for the Montgomery County Math and Science Building and the information that's on the website for the upcoming meeting on Tuesday, June 18th at 7 p.m. The city staff attended the Purple Line CAT meeting, Community Advisory Team meeting, on Wednesday, May 29th. The meeting included a discussion about construction progress and updates, business outreach, station artwork, which I want a lot more of, by the way, and pedestrian safety for University Boulevard stations of the Purple Line. It's estimated that Purple Line design is 85% and construction is 15% complete. MTA's goal is for service to begin in late 2022. I know you've seen that there have been a lot of work along the route, and that had primarily to do with utility relocation and that kind of thing over time. And you'll see the medians being affected for some time. I appreciate particularly Councilwoman Searcy's emphasis on safety and not just having cones out where cones are not sufficient along University Boulevard. There will be traffic signal reconstruction at University Boulevard and New Hampshire Avenue, 23rd Avenue, and Campus Drive. Beginning summer 2019, so coming up, traffic will be shifted to the southern side of University Boulevard East for the Phase 1 construction of the Northwest Branch Bridge, and Phase 1 is expected to last a year. So it's a big project. Mm-hmm. The Purple Line website has been updated with a lot more information, so people who have looked at it before can come back and look at it again. One of the things I wanted to alert the council about, so you're not surprised, is that we're submitting a Maryland Bikeways grant application to continue design work for the bikeway along New Hampshire Avenue. You have to start somewhere and fill out the application and get it in. It takes a while to go through these processes. The current grant will fund complete design work for the entire new Ave bikeway and develop documents for the bikeway's eventual construction. Maryland Bikeways requires a 20% match of city funds, which would be $145,000 out of the estimated total final design documents is $725,000. We don't know if we will get any of these funds. We don't know if we'll get a partial amount. It will still come back to you, but we need to submit the grant application. So I'm giving you the heads up. We can back out if we have to, but we do need to get the application in so we have an opportunity to get the funds. Wanted to give kudos to Karen McPherson. She's one of our wonderful librarians who gets stuff in the post. It's really interesting. And this particular May 23rd, they had and Sunday, June 2nd, a very interesting book section in the Washington Post, and she had a big page of it. And it's just wonderful that we have this kind of professionalism that can be shared with the world. And it was an interesting article. It's amazing what she keeps putting out. And so I'm giving her some kudos. I am also just noting we have hiring updates. People who are looking for positions or know people should look on our careers section of our website. We're losing another person. It's not on here, budget specialist. The person who helped put together the document that you guys reviewed and would get the final one together. She's taken a position closer to her home. As we go through the discussion on the housing and economic development plan and our personnel issues, we do need to think about what does it take to have housing that staff can afford that's nearby. And whether that would have been the case for the two recent people who have left, I don't know, but it is an issue. I think it's an issue for all close into the Beltway communities about having a place for staff to live and be able to have a healthy lifestyle. And so anyway, it's kind of a kick in the stomach to have that happen. As we talk about the personnel items later, She's one of many people that she's the only person in that position. So it's not like there's another person that can pick up the slack. We have to find somebody new to fill it. So sorry to see her go, but if somebody needs jobs and is skilled, please look in our careers section. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And also, I want to say that there was a nice spread in Montgomery Magazine.
Oh, that's right.
I think it's
That's
this month or next month? This month on art. Yeah, arts in Tacoma Park, and just thank our staff for working hard on that article and everyone who participated in it. All right, we will now move on to our work session. We have 3 this evening. The first is a presentation and discussion of our community grant award recommendations, and I believe we have our grants committee with us, and if you want to...
I think some are going to come up here. There's some other chairs perhaps we can pull out
pull up
from
more
up
chairs
here.
if we want, or...
Grab one of the black ones.
And as you're getting settled, we just want to say thank you to the committee for volunteering and working on this.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I'm Jennifer Hale, the grants coordinator for the City of Tacoma Park. I'm here tonight to assist with the presentation of the Grant Review Committee's FY20 funding recommendations for the Community Grants Program. I'll begin by providing a little history on the Community Grants Program, as well as highlight some administrative improvements we've implemented in the last few months, and some that are still to come. Following my brief remarks, Grant Review Committee member Rachel Branneman will discuss the work of the committee and introduce the committee's FY20 funding recommendations, along with member Nadine Block. But first, as I'm a new face to the committee, I'll take the opportunity to introduce myself a little more. I've been a nonprofit professional for 15 years, working mostly in membership, development, and in grant making. I've been on both sides of the fundraising equation, working to raise funds as a director of development, and also giving out grants as a grants administrator. I joined the city staff in October of last year on a part-time basis. In my position, I administrate the Community Grants Program, the Homestretch Down Payment Assistance Program, and the Community Partners Program, or CP2, among other duties. As someone who used to apply for grants, I understand the competing realities that our applicants and grantees balance every day of limited administrative resources and the never-ending need for financial support. Also, as an experienced grant maker, I'm aware of the responsibilities of granting public funds and the importance of transparency, accountability, and evaluation. My job, as I see it, is to ensure a fair, thorough, and straightforward process in the administration of the city's grant programs. I want to draw your attention to the document we've handed out today. Everything I'm going to talk about is explained in greater detail in the bound version of the summary report on funding recommendations you have before you. The Community Grant Program was established by Council Action in 2014 and provides up to 10,000. Did I lose the mic? And provides up to 10,000 for programs, projects, and events that improve the quality of life for city residents by providing greater access and opportunities for participation in the arts and sciences, with an emphasis on benefiting low-income residents. This grant program is overseen by the Department of Housing and Community Development, and all funding decisions, all funding recommendations are made by the Grant Review Committee. Since its beginning, the Community Grants Program has provided funding to nearly 40 projects for a total investment of $450,000. But that's only part of the picture. One of the requirements of this grant program is that grantees match every dollar of city support with another dollar of fundraising or in-kind support from another source. And what I've noticed in my short time here is that most grantees exceed that match, and this year will be no different. If the Grant Review Committee's recommendations are adopted, in FY20, the city's investment of $80,000 will be leveraged by grantees to concentrate an additional $170,000 of resources for a combined program value to the city of more than $250,000. We've continued to build upon this program's existing administrative framework. This year, we moved the application entirely online, contracting with Fondant, an industry leader in grant lifecycle management. We were excited to partner with Fondant because it not only increases our administrative efficiencies, it also makes applying for our grants easier. Just one feature I'd like to highlight is their integrated GuideStar profiles. Applicants can copy answers to common questions from their GuideStar profile, making it easier and faster to apply for funding not only from us, but from other funders as well. And since we choose the questions we ask, we are still getting the answers needed to make informed funding decisions. This is just one way that we worked to lower or remove barriers to applying and to increase the number of applicants to this program. We also dramatically increased our outreach, and I'm pleased to report that our efforts resulted in 42% more applications this year than the previous year, and 30% of all applicants were first-time applicants to this program, having never previously applied. Lastly, I want Council to know that with this class of FY20 grantees, we're initiating new, robust, and tailored evaluation measures to quantify better the work and impact of these programs by capturing meaningful metrics and reporting them back to the Council and to residents. The newest Grant Review Committee member, Susan Rosenblum, who couldn't be with us tonight, has extensive professional expertise in federal grant management and evaluation, and has offered to assist in developing an evaluation program for the community grants. Before I turn it over to Rachel and Nadine, I'd like to thank the Council for fully funding this program. The committee's recommendations provide support for an excellent mix of new programs, new applicants, and some returning programs that will benefit Tacoma Park residents and help create a more livable community for all. With that, I'm pleased to introduce Grant Review Committee members, Rachel Bredeman and Nadine Block. Thank you.
Hi. As she mentioned, I'm Rachel Bredeman. I live in Ward 6, and I'm very glad that I got to walk over here tonight instead of drive to the meeting.
We did it just for you, Rachel.
Yeah, I thought so. Firstly, I'd like to, also thank the City Council for restoring grant funding to the original level of $80,000. This enables the Grants Committee to be a reliable funding partner to our grantees. Last year, we had an erosion in trust of the city from reduced funding, which impacted our grantees' ability to conduct their programs. Secondly, I'd like to encourage the council to reach out to constituents in your wards to help us fill 3 to 4 positions, which will be open starting in the 2020 fiscal year. We are asking you to help identify individuals with the skills and background necessary to help us continue to improve our partnership with grantees and increase the impact that the program has on the city and its residents. Our committee currently consists of 7 highly qualified individuals with a range of experience. That includes those who review federal grant applications and audit grant programs for the Office of Inspector General at the Department of Labor and Department of Health and Human Services, a training director and education specialist at national and international nonprofits, a director of outreach and operations at Progressive Nonprofits, an individual who oversees and implements policies, processes, and strategies for a national organization serving university women, which awards $3.7 million annually in grants, and a legal and legislative individual who's working with national LGBT and environmental organizations, and who has also been counsel to members of the State House of Representatives and U.S. Senate. For myself, I personally have worked in the nonprofit field for almost 20 years, first as a fundraiser and executive director, and then as a fundraising and organizational consultant. My firm specializes in grant writing, and we've written hundreds of grants since we began in 2011. I've also served on numerous nonprofit boards of directors and have seen the funding process as a staff member, board member, consultant, and as a funder. When reaching out to your constituents, please consider that we're looking for more representation, specifically from wards 1, 2, and 4. And we are looking to increase our diversity in age, race, ethnicity, and experience. This year, we made considerable changes to the committee process that I'd like to outline to give you an idea of how we made our funding choices. We updated the review process and began using Fountain, as Jen mentioned, which allowed us to weigh and rank our scores. We added a racial equity lead committee member and asked grantees to address racial equity in their proposed projects. And we lowered barriers to entry for organizations seeking to apply for the grant by sharing it across more websites, emails, and citywide materials and social media. Moving forward, we envision incorporating even more holistic service offerings. That includes increasing committee engagement by encouraging the committee to attend funded programs and also inviting you guys to attend grantee events with a committee member. Providing resources and increased outreach to grantees, helping them answer questions like how can they access funding outside of our grant? How can we help connect them to local grant makers? And then also developing personalized evaluations with grantees to determine what is meaningful and tells a story for their particular organization. This year, the Grants Committee had more strong grant applications than we were able to fund. That is a good place for the committee to be in. That means we're choosing exceptional programs that represent diverse aspects of the STEAM program and serve a wide array of Takoma Park residents, young and old. You can see our recommendations on page 4 of your booklet. I wanted to highlight just a few of our projects from this year to show the diversity of programs with new and returning grantees. Historic Tacoma has been funded in the past, but not in fiscal year 2019. They requested and have been recommended for an amount of $8,000 from a total budget of $18,000, which will impact 8,000 beneficiaries. They intend to document, preserve, and elevate the history and legacy of the historically Black community in Takoma Park in the early 20th century. There is an urgency to document these dozen or so stories while individuals are still able to share their stories through their own words. The stories and experiences will be made accessible to school children and residents through a series of short videos for use in schools, public presentations, and on city TV. Audio stories will be broadcast on Tacoma's radio station. Performing Arts Center for African Cultures is a first-time applicant for the grants program. They requested $10,000 and were recommended for $7,800 out of a total budget of $20,000. Their program will engage seniors age 50 and above to participate in an African-based moderate to low impact dance exercise program. That program engages them in cardio exercise to support a healthy lifestyle and will take place in partnership with the Takoma Park Community Center, and they intend to reach 300 seniors. And the third program I'd like to mention is Crossroads Community Food Network. They are a returning grantee that was funded in fiscal year 2019. They bring farm to fork programming to students at Takoma Park elementary schools, as well as the Crossroads Farmers Market and other community sites. These sessions feature cooking lessons, food tastings, farmer visits, and hands-on activities for students. They are working on setting a foundation for a lifetime of healthy eating habits to improve the community for everyone. They intend to serve 2,000 beneficiaries in the schools and through community events. They requested, and we are recommending funding of $10,000 of a total $35,750. I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have about the grant committee, our decision-making process, and future plans to support grantees, as would Nadine.
Great, thank you very much. for this this evening. It's always a pleasure to hear from the Grants Committee, and I just want to say you guys really upped it this year. This is very impressive. And I know for a number of years, folks who have been using our process have said it's been cumbersome, hard to apply the application and everything, and I'm really glad that this year you were able to make improvements in that, and it sounds like it's been a great improvement. So thank you for all of that. I'll open it up to my colleagues. Since I don't, again, have my little screen in front of me, Councilmember Kovar, do you want to start? And then we'll go down there. How's that?
Thank you for the presentation and for all the work that went into it, and to your colleagues who weren't here. I think it looks like a really good roster of projects and organizations. I think most of us are familiar with a lot of them through the work that they do in the community, and I think they're meritorious. And the projects in particular look really well focused on some of the populations and communities that we've talked about emphasizing previously, that the council has talked about emphasizing, wanting the benefits of the grant programs to flow, in particular to underserved communities, lower income communities, et cetera. And so I think that's been done from what I can tell here. I had a few questions, and whoever wants to answer can answer. One thing you mentioned was making sure that we get to attend some of these events that they do, and you don't have to say exactly how you would do that now, but I would like that to happen. So I hope that becomes a reality, and I don't know if you've thought that through much yet at this point. If so, someone can talk about it. If not, I would just say I'd be enthusiastic about it. Okay. Well, okay.
One of the next things that we'll undertake is reevaluating the contracting process of how we onboard new grantees. And I think, working hand in glove with grantees and being aware of their calendar early on. Okay. And then also as a requirement of contracting is them providing at least tentative schedules of events, and that we make it a requirement of our contracts that tickets be provided for events and that there's notice given for events. Okay, but also working closely and being aware of the... Good.
Well, I think that sounds like a great idea. You mentioned the first-time applicants, that there were some. Did it seem like there were more than in past years? And I see everybody nodding. And what brought that out? Was it just really making an effort to try to find them through different ways of engaging, or is there some other?
I think part of it was that we definitely reached out through more avenues and encouraged people even outside of the 501c3. There was some business, what are they called? Business organizations? Yeah. Anyways, another 501c designation also were able to apply. So I think just letting people know about the opportunity when they may not have known about it before.
Okay.
And I just want to add too, I just think a lot of it's due to both Grace and Jennifer's outreach and really dedication to the program. I mean, we do the usual stuff that we do within our networks, but I do think that having both of you here was really remarkable.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Two other things. Just to illustrate for people sometimes how these things come about, when the Dance Exchange had their 40th anniversary, we had a proclamation for that last year, and I think I did the initial draft based on information they sent, and of course Jesse Carpenter turned it into something that the mayor could actually read, because mine was way too long. Everybody won't be surprised at that. But then when I was talking with the people at the Dance Exchange, what emerged was that they had an interest in expanding their programming specifically for the city, because some of what they've done, they're nationally recognized, but they wanted to do things here in their home city. And I checked with some of my colleagues about whether some of the other apartment buildings might work out for that. And as a result of that kind of process, then we end up with something like that. So I think that's a really cool example of how that can happen. And the last thing is, I know in the grant world we don't usually talk about the unsuccessful ones, and I'm not asking you to go through all that, but can you just say a few words about, were there other good projects that if there was more money they might have been funded? Was it a hard thing to to choose? Was there any sort of theme about the ones who didn't get it that people want to mention? Nadine, did you want to say?
Sure, I'll start, and then Rachel and Jennifer, you fill in. But, I mean, I think the biggest thing here is the STEAM indication. So science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics is not always reflected in the proposals that we get. And that's actually the biggest challenge, I think, to help people. And even some of the people who got grants this year came back after applying last year and not getting grants. And some people who got grants last year because of various things didn't get grants this year because really their projects are not directly linked to science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. I think that's the biggest issue. I mean, there is some issue with understanding of how to fill out grant applications and deadlines and complete information, but again, I really think that Grace and Jennifer have done a good job with shepherding people and helping people through the process, and the online piece of it's been really helpful. And there were two very clear times when potential applicants could come in and get advice and support and information about it. So I don't know if you want to add to it, but I think that's really the biggest challenge. And actually, there's one other thing I would add while we're sort of on this. From my perspective, and we talk about this a lot, it would be great to be able to award smaller amounts of money. So we are, I don't know if you know this, but our limit is 5K. So we have to award 5K. And that's a pretty small amount of money, generally, in the big world of things. But locally, for small groups that are just getting started, actually, that's quite a significant sum if you have to have a matching grant to go with it. And the matching grant is great. I'm not arguing against that. Just we might be better served by being able to have a limit of, let's say, 3K or something else, particularly since there's been changes in the Tacoma Foundation granting cycle and things like that. So just
So that
throwing
could
in
apply
there.
to really just seed money for some brand new type groups maybe, or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, well, if you're not for profit, or this is a whole nother piece about whether or not you need 501c3 status,
Yeah.
or that's another thing that I'd be advocating for, is not having to have 501c3 status. But there are ramifications of that. But the understanding that when you're new and starting something, if it's just a program and one day a week afternoon program for one semester, or I mean, you could think about a whole number of things. That 3K is a good chunk of money. So that's just sort of part of the thinking about it. And all over the foundation world, people are thinking about how do we do more appropriate size and scale grants, and how do we reach those who are, for many reasons, not aware of or able to compete in the world of grant making. And so some of these things about smaller grants, not being a 501c3, or very clearly helping people partner with a 501c3 that could take them on as a project, or the reporting requirements, or the risk taking that we're willing to do. I mean, granted, and maybe I shouldn't be going into all this, but we only have $80,000, right? So that's not a great amount of money, but it is some significant amount of money for some groups, and we make a significant impact with it. And we might also, if we're thinking about taking greater risk elsewhere, about what that would look like. And that might look like less money, less formalized, documentation, ability to report on longer-term change, rather than grant cycle being 1 year. Sometimes it's really difficult to really formulate transformative change measurements.
In one year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, that's great.
And I would also add that one of the things that we're hoping to do is not only engage with grantees, but people who've not received grants. So on some of those things where I was mentioning that we'd like to do more hands-on programming for them, that includes like trying to, if they don't get funding from us, maybe having a regional grant makers session where they can come and learn about other people who could possibly fund them, who might be willing to offer seed funding and things like that we're not currently able to do.
Thank you.
No, we're going to switch up. No, Councilwoman Kostick.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for all your work on this, and I appreciate in particular the thought you've given to trying to attract new applicants and thinking beyond what has been done in the past to new opportunities. I'm really happy to see that there were higher numbers of applications and new applicants this year as well. I think that's a really good sign. And I had a chance this past year, about a month or so ago, Susan let me know about an opportunity to view a film festival that was organized by the Gandhi Brigade, which it was not a direct, the people showing their films there were not actual grant part of the recipients for the program, but they were doing a very similar thing. So I appreciate the opportunity to do that, and it was a great chance to see that in action, so I'm really glad that you're thinking about that moving forward. And I think it was great. I mean, there were middle schoolers who had done these amazing films, and it was a really neat opportunity. One of the questions I had that I think you touched on a little bit with regards to the applicants and making sure that they were applying for something that fit the arts and sciences focus. Obviously, this is a much larger discussion, but do you think in some way broadening out that goal of the grants and not necessarily blowing it out of the water, but including some additional parts of what is required or offering some other opportunities to improve quality of life through the grants would be useful? And do you have any ideas about what those might be?
Well, we've definitely discussed that in meetings, and I think we had some really strong proposals this year that just we didn't feel like fit into the STEAM requirements that we would otherwise would have loved to have funded. I think part of that. There was some, female empowerment programming, youth programming, and I believe there was a job application program that we thought, like, for workforce readiness was really important, but just didn't fit into our scope right now.
Thanks. Yeah, as I was looking through this, I noticed a few things that seemed like maybe there were aspects of what they were doing overall, but maybe weren't part of what was specifically funded by this grant that focused on things like job training and education in general and, like you said, female empowerment and those sorts of things. So that would be something I'd be interested in looking at a little more deeply in the future. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in and ask a follow-up question, and then because I'm really I'm glad to see that one of the members went through the racial equity training program, and wanted to just hear, because this is new. We've just started undertaking this work and how it's worked this year to try and apply it. I have a couple of follow-up questions on what else, what went well, what didn't go well, what else you need to support that, and then kind of following up on Caustic's question. I think 5 years ago, we put in place the STEAM requirement because there was a feeling that the grants program was kind of all over the place, and we're like, what is it doing? And where is it going? And so I think the council at that time was like, oh, we need better parameters. It's, it's a good chunk of money, but it's not a lot of money, and we want to have some criteria. And that's kind of where we landed. And so I'd be curious now that we've begun the racial equity work, how that's going, and does that actually help provide maybe a framework for the future for the grants? Anyway, I'll let you talk.
Well, I guess, I've been on the committee now kind of a long time, and I don't remember, I remember when the STEAM thing came in, and I don't remember what it was beforehand, and I don't know why the grants got found. I don't know what the original statement of purpose was. I don't know if do we know?
I don't think there was one. I think that was the, I think that the problem was, it was people that somebody kind of knew or thought it would be a good idea, and there just wasn't criteria that was easy.
So just, maybe this is sort of backwards, but I actually really support the criteria. I really like it. I think science, technology, engineering, arts, and math is there's a lot of potential there. And I think that it also allows us to support things that have a really specific focus. And that is helpful in identifying potentially successful projects. Because there's a lot of feel-good stuff out there. I mean, I work in that field. I know. So I don't know. I support that. I wouldn't mind if alternate years we had other equally specific focus, but I do really appreciate that box. I think that's really important. And then about the racial equity thing, one of the challenges has always been, and you see that we have this, these bars of participation or that knock people out already. If they don't have at least 75% of Tacoma Park residents and at least 51% low to middle income residents participating in their project, they're not eligible. And it's always been a challenge to help people and to help them figure out how to make sure that they meet these criteria. And it has been getting better, I would say, over the years, from using entry and exit surveys to using the farm's documentation, the free and reduced meal lunch documentation with the schools, to figuring out on site how to, survey the community that actually shows up, or go to particular housing units that already meet certain requirements within the city. I mean, so that I think is the most real, rubber meets the road actual impact on racial equity. And that's one of the reasons why this grant program is so important, because it has these guidelines of who should actually get the money and what makes them appropriate applicants. And a lot of the people on the committee, I would say, have been through one kind or other, if not multiple, know your bias, racial equity, anti-discrimination, cultural competency, you name it, things within their workplaces or their general participation in the community. So, you want to ask?
Yeah, I think it was for the first time this year, we specifically asked a question in the application for each applicant to explain racial equity within their programming. And so each project had that component that the committee was able to review and consider their answer.
And I'd also say that we have tried to, with getting Foundant, I think that reducing barriers is a big part of racial equity, and that has been one way that we have been able to reduce barriers for organizations who may not have applied to us in the past. I think there's other ways that we can continue to improve upon that too, using the racial equity framework.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you all for being here tonight and the work you've done on this. It's especially heartwarming to see kind of the maturing of the committee in a process sense. You mentioned two things that I'm very interested in, but I'm not sure. I know that you all are very involved in these recommendations for the grants, but I'm not sure how much you follow on with the other pieces of this. You mentioned two things earlier: administrative costs and the challenges that presents for many of the nonprofits, and also the reporting requirements. That's an area that I think also needs to mature, if you will. And I just wonder, how much the committee is going to be involved in that, and what kind of plans you have for that.
Well, I'll mention that the committee has already started talking about that, at least in 3 meetings, I believe it's come up. And as we reevaluate the contracting with the grantees, which will begin soon, there's a chance to reevaluate that administrative burden. Right now, there's 4 quarterly reports and a final report, and regular feedback from the grantees is that that is a pretty onerous set of reporting requirements. And I know the committee is interested in looking at different ways to satisfy the requirements of being good stewards of public funds, while also recognizing that we can lift certain administrative barriers for our grantees.
Thank you.
Councilman Searcy?
Thank you so much. This is amazing. I love not only the diversity of the entities that are recommended, but also the fact that they're hitting on different priorities that have been communicated by the council. Racial equity, a livable community for all, access, people of all ages, those kinds of things, which I think is amazing. I actually want to talk a little bit more about perhaps the next iteration and kind of brainstorming about the possibility of doing this, but also trying to address that problem that you all talked about earlier, which is the need for some sort of mechanism for those smaller, grassroots, community-based folks who need just a little bit of money and maybe are not a 501c3. There are a number of neighborhood associations and groups that are not 501c3s, don't necessarily have all of the bandwidth per se, but they're a group of residents that have come together and they need to make some improvements directly where they live, you know, and trying to figure out the right way to come up with some money to do those things and the programming in their community. Would that be something that you all would be willing to kind of think through? You know, could we start or recommend, and looking at Grace, to the council for, you know, even starting out with something trivial as like $5,000 as a pilot project to kind of think through what would be the bare minimum that you would need to say, okay, you need to tell us what you're doing with the money. You're absolutely right. Those quarterly reports are challenging. The 501c3 requirements and making sure that you have the necessary bank accounts and tax ID stuff and all of that stuff is a lot. And you do have a number of small groups within the city who live, work, breathe, eat, sleep that just need help with printing out flyers. I mean, someone has to just come out of pocket to print out flyers for the next neighborhood meeting. So would you all be willing to kind of think about coming up with some sort of programming to kind of fit that need? I know that, you know, Tacoma Foundation as well has been recognizes that that's a problem.
I would say definitely yes. Something that I've been pushing since I got onto the committee a year and a half ago. So I think we would definitely appreciate the opportunity to figure out like how we can. I mean, obviously, I feel like we're already making a big impact, but I feel like we can make an even bigger impact at the grassroots level that we're not quite able to do yet.
I mean, definitely. I'm in the middle of setting up one of these projects internationally, so, and we're talking about, you know, 500 to thousands of, a couple $1,000s. It's a huge impact. It can be. So, yeah. I mean, I don't know.
I would definitely encourage, you know, the grants committee to come back to us with a recommendation on how to fix that, because I do feel very strongly that that's been something that we've talked about for some time, and really needing to try to figure out a way to think through some of the hurdles, because there are hurdles. I mean, there's going to need to be more technical assistance because you have people who are not as familiar with the process. And there's probably going to need to be a little bit more hand-holding along the way, just to make sure people know which documents to submit and receipts to keep and that kind of thing. But I do think that in a community that is as social, you know, active as we are, it could perhaps go a really long way to kind of helping build up different community organizations that aren't at that 501c3 level.
And I have seen that be successful in other communities, and it is a lot more administrative hand-holding. When I lived in Dallas, there is a group called South Dallas Fair Park Trust, and it was administrated by the city, and they were giving out grants to community-based organizations, and basically you just turned in your receipts and for your program, and then they gave you the money back after you'd already paid for those services. And I think that there's something to be said for that model, and then as well as our model, and possibly finding a way to like mesh those, and seeing how we can make sure that organizations have the resources necessary while also being able to overcome some of those barriers that they face, like you're talking about.
Thank you.
Great. Councilman Devala?
Yeah, this is great. This is a wonderful package, and easy to look through, easy to read, to understand what you were thinking, and both the staff and the committee, especially the committee. I'm very impressed with the changes that this program's been through, and with where it is now. So thank you. I had a couple specific questions about a couple of the projects, but I think we'll just skip that for now. It was more curiosity than anything else. I also had in mind a couple of sort of looking to the future questions. And one is, at some point, I would appreciate a summary of the progress made under last year's grants. I know we're not ready to wrap them up yet, but when that happens, just so that those of us, especially the ones of us that are new on the council, can see what it looks like when you get the final report and you see what happened. Just a sort of a real basic evaluation piece would be great. And I love that you're talking about basic metrics and keeping track of all that application. And I've been thinking about looking forward to what the next iteration might be. And I was going to ask you about the Tacoma Foundation in coordination with that. So that's come up already. Both the need, as Councilmember Searcy put it, for that smaller grassroots group and what they need. And then I think it was Councilmember Kovar mentioned, and then the Tacoma Foundation has their programs evolved. And so it might be a good time to put the heads together and see what the next iteration ought to be. It might be that we just stick with this because this is working. As Nadine said, this is a pretty good set of criteria, but there's these other needs to consider too. So I can't wait to hear what you have to say next. Thank you.
And I will just mention that we're currently creating a summary document, an impact statement for the FY19 grantees. They'll be completing their final reports in the next few weeks.
Great.
And so we will provide that back to council.
Thank you.
Councilman Kovar, do you have another?
Yeah, there was one other thing I wanted to ask, and the mayor, I think, had inquired about the STEAM aspect of it, and I think Nadine Block also spoke about that. And I have to admit that I love that, and I think it's laudable, but I kind of wish every now and then, as a more of a humanities type person, that we would have that occasionally. And you know, I think you mentioned it's harder to quantify some of those things, and so maybe that's naturally why the STEAM part comes in. But you know, I can imagine there being a program, for example, that taught young from different parts of the city, you know, how to engage in politics or something like that, which wouldn't ever be covered in STEAM. And so I think you mentioned maybe one year having a different set of criteria. I haven't thought it through, but that was in the back of my mind, and that conversation just sort of piqued that. So I just toss it out there. I'm not, you don't have to answer that, but it was just a sort of a thought I had. So.
Well, if they called it political science, we could fund it. Sorry.
Well, despite what the mayor may say, polling has never seemed quite that accurate to me, but.
Oh. Anyways, I have one question, and I don't actually know, I don't think we can answer it now, but I'm interested in knowing what the process would be, like what Talisha said. If we actually have a recommendation, then what happens to that recommendation? What kind of money are we talking about? Is it going to come out of the already tight 80,000, or is there another 5K somewhere that we could apply for some kind of smaller grants? And I do think we do need to check in with Tacoma Foundation and see what their this year's plans are and how their flexibility is with their scheduling and assigning funding and stuff like that. But those are my nuts and bolts questions.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things I was going to say maybe in wrap up is that given the grant schedule and how you all are doing things, I'd rely on you and Jen to kind of come back and tell us when you're at a place and to, you know, is it 3 months from now, 4 months, 5 months, to come back with recommendations and say, okay, we've thought about it, we heard your feedback, this is what we heard from the grantees last time, you know, going forward, we'd like to put this in place. And I want to pick up on something I think that Nadine said about, you know, taking risks and looking at things and being innovative. And I'm just going to throw this out there, and you can just leave it here and not pick it up, or you can think about it. One of the things that that I've brought up to the council and talked about is I'd really like us to look at a participatory budgeting process moving forward in some way. We don't know yet where that would sort of live and how that would move forward in the city. But just thinking as you all were talking and thinking through the conversation I just had here, I would just, again, it may not be you, it may not be your committee, but in the spirit of thinking about taking chances, taking risks, and thinking about things, if you did feel that fit in there or you would want to have a part of that moving forward, I'd be interested in that as well. So I think we look to you in the next couple of months. Just let us know when you want to come back, and we'll continue the conversation. And we look forward to hearing about the grantees and what they're doing, and I can't wait to go see some stuff. So thank you very much for all your work.
So if I might just.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
So we would be bringing back to you the recommendations for approval.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, right. That's it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
On these specific grants.
Right. Well, that's this. Like, right. Yeah, we got off. Like we just love this, so we
Right,
just
we-
like
yeah,
moved.
right,
Yes.
right.
So
we have an ordinance.
Yeah.
To bring that back.
You'll have an
and vote on
ordinance
it.
that comes before you.
Right.
To vote on.
We're going to vote on this, right? Yeah. We'll vote on these specific grantees. But thank you. Thank you. All right. Next up, we have a presentation and discussion of our Board of Elections recommendations for city charter and code amendments. So I think we're going to have some or all of our Board of Elections folks come up and join us. And just to kind of set the stage for there are a number of things, please don't trip, that are being recommended that we'll talk to our Board of Elections about. This is the beginning of our conversation tonight on these topics and potential edits to our city charter and code amendments. I know a number of us have already put forward some questions to ask. We will have to come back to this, most likely in the fall, have some other work sessions and vote on it. So tonight we are starting a conversation about charter and code amendments that will continue. So I just kind of wanted to set that stage. And we have our city attorney with us as well tonight. So am I turning it, who am I turning it over to?
So we have our Board of Elections here. The chair is Brian Ernst, and we have the vice chair is Arthur David Olson. Then we have Lori Grazio here, and Curtis Antonucci, and of course the city attorney. And the board has been working for, I think, the past year on taking a look at the charter and code in this interim year to see what improvements can be made. And so Brian Ernst is prepared to walk the council through these changes.
Thank you. To provide a little bit of background, so I'm Brian Ernst. I'm the chair of the board. I'm joined, as Jesse introduced, some of the other members. We have 3 members who are not present but are also on the board. And Arthur David Olson here is the vice chair of the board. For these changes, we started this process, as Jesse mentioned, about a year ago, and it was for a number of reasons. First, it was because we had the time to do it. This was a 3-year gap between elections, which was unusual because of the change in date. So there was extra time, and with that, we thought we could look at the charter and the code in a comprehensive manner. So in the past, we've made piecemeal changes to the different sections, and as a result, there were some inconsistencies between the language, between how things were presented, and in fact, in how practice aligned with the writing that's in the code. So we look to make changes for consistency, to make it less piecemeal. We look to simplify language when possible and add clarity in places where it seemed unclear. And then also to match what we do in practice during elections and before and after the elections to the language that's in the code itself. In some cases, those 2 things did not actually match. We also were looking for best practices from other jurisdictions in the region. So we have looked at the municipal codes for City of Hyattsville, for example, to see what are they doing in their code that we could or should emulate. Also, the state of Maryland has made several changes in their election law. For example, they are implementing same-day registration. They're also going to, or they also have provided for felons to have the right to vote upon release. And so all of those also affect our election code. Finally, the changes were made to provide for flexibility and for some forward thinking around the 2020 elections for the city. Those elections will be much different than the ones we've had in the past. And so we were thinking of how the code or the charter could be changed to help us in preparing for the 2020 elections. I think those were all of the pieces, though I would look to my colleagues if they have any other additions. And then before I open it up, I wanted to mention just a few of the notable changes, I guess, of the many edits that we have made. A lot of these are already outlined for you, but I wanted to note in particular the change in the supplemental voter roll for the city. So in the past, we get the voter list from Montgomery County. That includes most of the voters in the city. And then we also have had a supplemental list that includes the people who are not registered to vote with the county. This has been non-citizens, and it has included felons. Since the changes have been made in the state law, this would, in effect, then only include non-citizens. We felt this created a poor perception that we have a non-citizen list of some sort. So the changes to the code allow for people to register to vote just in the city, regardless of your citizenship, and you would then be a registered voter just for the city of Tacoma Park and not with the county. This also then lets us say that the list is not a specific non-citizen list, it is just the supplemental voter list. Second, we have added a number of changes to the campaign finance section. This includes both on reporting for contributions and then also expenditures. I think this is important for transparency around where candidates are getting their money and also how they're using it. And then finally, we have added a section for payment of return postage for absentee ballots, which I think is an equally important way to reduce barriers to voting for people who can't make it to the polling place on election day, but also find it difficult to get postage for their absentee ballots. I will turn to anyone else if you have additional comments, but then we've received a few questions from council members and look forward to any additional questions.
Great. Well, I know Councilwoman Costick did her homework, so we're going to start with her because she had a long list of questions.
Did send you a list of questions, and I don't know if you have responses to any of them or if you want to take more time. That's totally fine. I wanted to start off, first of all, by saying I was struck by how much work you all have clearly done, so thank you very much. I mean, this is tedious work, and it's really getting into the weeds, but it's important, and I really appreciate all that you've done on that. I mean, overall, to me, I think that the kind of big picture recommendations that you have listed here and that you went through tonight are really good and are things that I would support in general. I guess one of my bigger picture questions was related to the processing of the absentee ballots. I think one of the recommendations was that the processing of those ballots be allowed to happen prior to the election day, which is not currently how it's done. And so I was curious about what does that processing involve, and what would that specifically involve doing that is not now done?
Sure. So
You're
I'll
it,
go for it?
Brian.
Okay. So the absentee ballots, as it stands, we receive them in the envelope as mailed, and then Jesse checks them against the list of ballots that have been mailed out, but at that point, it essentially stops. And so we wait until polls close on election day, and at that point start opening the envelopes and doing the organization of the absentee ballots, checking signatures, et cetera. That takes time, and it just adds extra time for counting and for getting the results in to the public and to the candidates on election night. By allowing for the processing of at least the first few steps of that, you can expedite the counting at the end of the election. So that would include taking the ballots, not the ballots, but there's an envelope within the envelope outside, checking the signatures. You then pass it along, you check them off as having voted in the register, and then you can even open the envelope that has the ballot in it and take the ballot out without counting it and put it in like a ballot box, for example, which would be then mixed in with all the other ballots and counted with all of them. That could be done before polls close, for example. So nothing would be counted yet, so we would have no idea how votes were playing out, just that they would be ready to be counted once polls close. In other places this is done, you just don't think about it as much. For example, when you go to the county and you think about you've voted early or you've submitted your ballot, they put those through the scanners. So the scanners have, in fact, processed the whole ballot in advance, but they don't count them yet. So they have all the ballots there, but they have not counted them yet. And so we would be doing something similar with the absentees.
And who would do that? Would that be the city clerk, or would that be a member of the Board of Elections? Who would be responsible for doing that as it went? Would it be happening kind of as they came in, or would it happen all at once on election day or prior to the tallying?
Sure. I think it would be the city clerk along with the board. And then I think the exact timing, we would have to decide if we were to go ahead with trying to process them ahead of time. My inclination would be to do it on election day, towards the end of the voting process. So close to the end of the election day time.
And then my other questions, a couple of them are sort of in the weeds and we don't need to discuss today. But one of my questions related to the anonymous donations and the specific, I was looking at the two numbers, and so you were recommending changing the $25 and 1 cent number to $25 flat for reporting who had donated to a campaign. And then after that, there was a separate section that said that no anonymous donations would be allowed. And I was just wondering about the interaction between those two, because I wondered as I was looking at it, as a candidate, would I record for myself, who has given me donations under $25, and how would you sort of make sure that those are not anonymous, I guess? And probably that's something that isn't likely to come up, but it seems like in the past, those numbers haven't been sort of seen in the way that they would be when expenses are reported, because you sort of just see, right now you just see a list of people who've given more than $25, and that's all that there is. And what we're talking about a move towards, which I think is very good, because I know for the last 2 years I've been thinking to myself, gee, am I supposed to like submit something to show people how I use this money? Because it seems like you should. And so now we're going to be moving towards a process where we'll have a list of donations that came in above $25, and then expenditures that might actually not match with that, because there would be donations under that $25. So I'm just trying to think about how that interplays with the anonymous donations and sort of how that all works.
Sure. So I think there's two things going on here. Then the anonymous donations is one aspect, and I think we as a board have had that same discussion about there's a difference in how, if you don't need to report under $25, but you can't take anonymous donations, how does that work? I think the answer here is also in the fact that we're requiring a maximum contribution from a single individual of, I think it's $1,000, which would mean that as a candidate you would be required to track cumulative donations from an individual. So you might, in fact, get $20 from someone and not need to report it. But if they gave you another $20, then you would need to know that you have received money before, because you then do need to report that you received 40. So that would be the way in which you could end up with an initial contribution that you don't need to report. It's not anonymous, but you do have to track it. And then later, it could be the case that you have to report it because they've given you more money. What we didn't want to happen was a situation where somebody was putting an envelope in your mailbox with money, saying it's for your campaign, and then doing it every day, and you just don't know who they are. And that person is anonymous and providing you a lot of campaign contributions.
Thank you. I think the last question I'll ask for right now is related to the signs in the right-of-way. I think this is a good provision to make explicit here because I know there's been confusion about that in the past. I think I remember in the past there being signs in the right-of-way at the polling places. And it seemed to me that the language in the revisions would not allow for that. So is that something you did consciously, or is that something you would want to change? I don't know that it matters, but I do think it's a place where people often do put their signs.
I actually
that
think,
actually
yeah.
came from me because we were working on a somewhat unrelated issue of generally signs in the right-of-way, which we want to prohibit. And it's tricky to regulate signs based on content, and so carving out campaign signs for special treatment can make it complicated from a constitutional perspective. I think we can look at carving out right-of-ways around polling places, while the polls are open, is a possibility if there's a sense that's important, and allowing signs simply on the premises, but off the right-of-way at polling places is not sufficient.
Great, thank you all very much.
Great. I'm going to jump in and wanted to follow up on a couple of things. So I want to go back to the anonymous donor because one of the things. First, thank you. I think all these. I agree with all these changes. And my questions and my only hesitation is not making it harder for people or putting obstacles in place that someone's like, I'm just not going to do this. I'm not going to run for council because this is so complicated. As it is now. We don't get paid a lot up here. we don't have campaigns where we're paying people. It's volunteers, it's our family, it's our friends who are doing this. And I don't want people to be afraid or intimidated to run for election because they're like, oh, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to figure this out. I have a lot of concerns with trying to track these anonymous donations and figuring out who gave, somebody gave me $20 at a house party, a coffee, and then 4 weeks later, having to know that that same person gave another $20 or something. I think if we're going to do the maximum donation of $1,000, we need to take serious consideration of maybe we need to get rid of the anonymations. Are people supposed to report? So if someone does have a house party for you and purchases food and other things and drinks, are you expecting them to report that as an in-kind donation? And does that count towards the $1,000 cap? And how does that reporting happen? And similarly with expenditures, can we give some guidelines regarding expenditures? Is it everything? If you go to the post office and buy a box of, a package of stamps to mail out something, I think we just should probably give people some more guidance. And again, maybe it's not what goes in the city charter and code, but I think the first time we put it in, especially if someone's never run for an elected office before, worked on a campaign, understanding how to make sure to keep track of all this. I want to make sure we're reducing barriers to people running for elections and not creating more, as we're also trying to be transparent. So those are some of the things I'd like us to think about. Again, in general, very much agree with moving in reporting of expenditures and having the cap, but want to really think through how that's operationalized in our next election. Very much like the idea of the postage on the absentee ballots, and even though my profession was disparaged a little while ago, I will say that we know from public opinion research that the reason young people actually sometimes fall off is they did a study and they found that they didn't know where to buy a stamp. And it was really interesting why people, particularly young people, were not returning absentee ballots, and the question was they needed a stamp and they weren't sure where to get one. So I think having postage on absentee ballots is a great idea. The last point I wanted to bring up for your consideration, you don't have to answer tonight, was the section on recalls. I think it has, excuse me while I find it, the 180 days. And I guess a question I have for you is, it seems long for the 180 days, and then if you calculate that folks for a recall campaign can collect signatures for 180 days, they get the signatures, then it's 45 days to an election, whether or not the person's recalled, and if the person does get recalled, then it's another 45 days for another election. Counting all those many months, given that we have generally 2-year terms, does that make sense? I guess is a question in terms of thinking about how long we're in office, when this might occur, and then the financial implications of holding elections. And so, not to say that I want to get rid of that, but just thinking about, does it make sense to try and shorten that amount of time? Because if you only have a 2-year term, if someone wants to recall you, it's almost like they have to start right away. So that's just something also to think about. Any Councilwoman DeMello?
Yeah, this is very helpful. Thank you so much for all the work you've done on this. It's very thorough. It's very understandable, and the changes all make sense to me. I do have a couple questions about a couple of them. The $1,000 limit makes sense to me.
Could you speak more into your mic so we can hear you?
Yeah,
please?
sorry about that. I was saying that I agree with pretty much all the changes, and I really appreciate the work you've done. I had a couple questions about some of the sections we've already been discussing. Back up for a moment to the right-of-way. The right-of-way varies greatly depending on which yard you're in. And that was an issue in the last campaign in a couple of places. I'm wondering if there is any merit in thinking about just saying a certain number of feet from the curb versus.
Have to say from our perspective, from the city perspective, that's very difficult because we have public works access into the area of the right-of-way. And, you know, it starts to play some difficult, some people get certain advantages than other advantages. I prefer very strongly that we keep the signs on people's private property and not into the right-of-way. And I know we've had a lot of discussion about this. I'm happy to go over the areas that we've talked about before. Not tonight, because I'm not prepared for it. But I would just strongly urge that we do have something that's definable, which would be the right-of-way line as opposed to just back from the street.
Yeah, I was thinking about it from the point of view of the people putting up the signs, not knowing that if they put it here, it's a 10-foot right-of-way, and then 3 doors down, it's a 15 or a 20-foot right-of-way.
So the object is that the people putting the signs are the property owners and that they're agreeable and they know where their property line is. I know not every property owner necessarily quite knows, but this really has to do with approval of the property owner.
Well, that's just something I was thinking about, whether there was a way to make it more user-friendly. On the reporting and on the campaign finance requirements and some of the reporting, I also got a little confused. And maybe for the sake of time, I should write it down and you guys can think about it rather than beat it to death right now. But one question in particular is, let's say someone has some campaign money left over from the last campaign. So now we're going to $1,000 limit and $25 and no anonymous donations. And yet there's a chunk of change that's been sitting around for a year or two or three with no, as far as I can tell from what I'm reading, no identity whatsoever other than it was sitting around from 3 years ago or 2 years ago. So that's a question, how does that work in the new scheme here? And I wondered about publication, if we're updating this in terms of using the word publication in a newspaper, et cetera, whether the city website or a city newsletter or a listserv might substitute for formal publication in a local newspaper that no longer exists. So just thinking about how to update that. And I think that was it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of your hard work on this. I mean, you're better than me. So I really do want to echo the mayor's concerns about making sure that we're not making the process so arduous that it's challenging for new people to kind of enter into running. One of the things when we're constantly talking about things of issues of race equity and trying to bring in more people of diverse backgrounds to serve on the council, keeping some of these things in mind in terms of the level of paperwork that's required and, you know, keeping track of all of these different things and counting person A from 5 months ago to how much they've contributed now might serve as an additional barrier from having newer people, particularly people who are not typical, you know, run for office. Just want to kind of put that out there. Another thing that I want to just piggyback off of what Councilmember DeBala raised is, you know, I'm all for communicating expenses. Is the idea that if you do have money at the end of your campaign, you didn't spend it all, right? What does that mean? Like, is there some idea that your contributions need to match your expenditures, or if there is some money left over, does that then become anonymous, no name, and then you can carry it over to the next campaign? So you don't have to carry that into, like, how do you appoint, trying to figure out the right way to say this, how do you appoint leftover campaign funds to an individual donor enough to know whether or not you would count that again the next cycle? Does that make sense? But again, I appreciate all of the work that you've done. I do want to echo Councilmember DeBala's point about the right-of-way. I am often amazed at the number of people, including myself, that did not know where my property line ended until I had an official survey done, and now I have a stake in the yard that lets me know, including so if we are trying to make sure that people understand what is meant by right-of-way, I completely understand the needs for consistent language. We don't want to start giving people different 20 feet here, 10 feet there. It's just going to make chaos when it comes time to do utility work. I get it. But we may want to consider some other way of trying to help people to better understand right-of-way, because some people may think it's my property, it's on this side of the sidewalk, but it technically is still in the public right-of-way. It's just closer to your house. So if we do want to use the language around public right-of-way, I think that's awesome. I think it's important for consistency reasons to make sure that people start to understand that point. But we may need to start thinking now about some, educational materials that may need to go out.
I appreciate that very much. I think it's very hard. I think the emphasis is not to talk about right-of-way because that's a very confusing term. I think it's talking about placing it on personal property with the approval of the property owner. I think, yes, we will still give a lot of clarification because people have that difficulty sometimes, but I think use of the term right-of-way gets many people confused, and so I do prefer some other way of communicating it. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Did you have something else?
I had one more, which was general. Did you consider any kind of campaign finance system, any kind of sort of $500 a race and more for the mayoral race, or anything like that? Did you consider any kind of public contribution? It's been raised by a bunch of folks over the past couple of years, but I haven't thought it through myself at all.
I mean, it's come up at a few other city council meetings. I think it's a question for all of you of whether that's something you would consider a priority, if you would like to use city funds to create some sort of public system. And then we would be here to help implement operationalize how that would work.
Okay, but first, these more obvious things. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And figure out how we're actually going to do the 2020 election.
Yes.
They're like, please, let us get through 2020. Yes, Councilor Murphy.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work you do, not just on this, but on elections. I know it's an intense amount of work. As we think about signs, I would encourage us to also consider apartment dwellers and see if there's any way we can better accommodate them. As it stands right now, apartment owners are able to put up signs on their property. Apartment dwellers are limited to sticking a sign in their 13th floor window.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's anything we can do to try to give them a fair participation in the election process. Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, and thanks for all the work. Obviously, quite a bit was put into it, and I think it syncs up pretty well. I have a few minor questions that maybe I'll just send in, but just a few things I wanted to mention. And if this wasn't thought about yet, it's okay not to answer it now. This will come up very rarely, but if there's a tie, I wasn't sure how comfortable I felt having it decided by lots, and I know there's a cost to run a special election or an additional election, but in the cases I've heard about where that's happened, it leaves a lot of bad feelings. So I don't know if that was something you guys spent a lot of time on or not.
We did debate that for quite a while. I think in the end, the ranked choice voting system, it's an instant runoff system, so the whole point is to avoid a runoff, and then to have to do a runoff anyway would seem to defeat the purpose. I think since it seems like such a small possibility, especially when you're doing these multiple rounds where you might have candidates that are having votes reallocated, it does seem very small as a possibility. That being said, the cost to the city and the need to get someone in office, it seemed like we've tried through the system to avoid this outcome, and so in the end, we thought that having it decided by lot, as it is done in some other places, would be fair.
Okay. Now there's a question about for special elections that happen, when someone leaves in the middle of a term for whatever set of reasons, and you have a requirement in there that signatures have to be obtained. And for regular elections, there's just a nomination process. So what's the reason to require signatures in that case?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a great question. That's a holdover from the existing code, and so we didn't change it, but I'm not sure how it initially started.
Okay. And then on charter amendments, and I think for some of the other things where a certain number of signatures are needed, or it calls for 20% of the registered voters. And so, I mean, I think in some of the elections, maybe that'll change going forward, but we never get 20% even voting or very close to it. So I just wonder, now maybe with the synchronization, then we'll surpass that, but I just wonder what the correct, like how you create a threshold that's high enough that you can't just do it, you know, every week someone comes up with another petition for a referendum, but it's not too high that it'll never be achieved. And I don't know if that came up at all.
We talked about the thresholds because they're here for recall petitions, they're for the charter amendments. It's consistently 20% throughout. I think it is a high bar. It's worth having a discussion if you think it should be lower or if you think it should be higher. But yeah, 20% given our overall turnout is a tough amount to get.
Although I think with the synchronization, my hope is that turnout will change. Just a few more quick things. I'll try to be quick.
Can I ask?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So on that point, did you look at what other communities have on this particular issue? And is 20% about what other communities have for this?
It varies,
It varies a lot.
widely. I mean, there's places where
right.
it's as
No
low as
guidance
5%,
there.
and then places where it's much higher. So it is a huge range.
Okay, thank you.
So I know we have it currently, and you have it in here, is a candidate nominating themselves. Is that a good practice? Could a candidate second themselves too? What's the thinking there?
I mean, I guess I've seen a candidate nominate themselves and have a second, and so since that seems to be how it is done thus far, we wanted to put it in the code to say that you can in fact do it because we have been doing it to date.
Okay. Surplus funds, does surplus funds mean money left over after the election or money left over if a person decides not to run for re-election, or does it matter? Because I think you said the funds can be used to make to be used for public or community purposes. I don't know how that would be defined, but does that mean you can't make a contribution to another candidate? Is that right?
Right. That's right.
And does surplus mean either of those two situations, or is it
correct?
Okay. Yeah. And I think I just have two other things. I often get that reaction when I talk. That's what happens.
See, that's what happens when you make fun of my profession.
All right.
I got you.
When you forgot my name. Okay. So this is the last thing. When there's a disputed election or outcome, there are two parts that they want to ask about. What if some, and it seems like the Board of Elections gets to decide, and then sometimes the council gets to decide. So what if someone on the Board of Elections is accused of malfeasance, and/or if the council is going to decide, but a council member is someone already on the council, would they potentially be deciding? So I don't know how that all would work, and maybe I'm reading too much into it.
I think it allows for the possibility to appeal up to the Montgomery County system. I'd have to let me look back through, but I think you can go beyond the council in just looking at me and saying no.
We have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
But could a council member vote on their own case, their own question? I guess that's the thing I'm wondering.
We'll have to look into that.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm good. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, I think that's it. I don't know if you have any other comments. We kind of just threw the kitchen sink at you. But I think as a foundation, what I'm hearing from the council is that this is
we're in agreement with the direction it's going in. We have some questions to iron out some things. And yeah, we look forward to you coming back. And hopefully, I think I was talking to the city clerk that we would see this back like probably sometime like in September or so, if that works with the board schedule. Because I do know the 2020 elections in prep for that is fast approaching, so we want to make sure we can get this done, but also give you enough time to think about these questions. It doesn't have to be in a council session, but if you have other things for us to consider, please send it back to us as well.
If we have a few more things, should we just forward them to the city clerk?
Yeah, we'll forward them to the city clerk, and then we'll compile them all. And so what if we, as a council, ask that we get all other additional comments back to the city clerk by Monday, June 10th, and we'll have some time to compile them and get them to you, and then you get to have the summer to
That's great. If I could just make one comment that may be helpful for you all, the council, and for the board in thinking about the campaign finance issue, because I've seen how it's administered in College Park, where they require reporting of, income and expenditures and carryover and things like that. And they do, every election season, they have the supervisor of elections, give a presentation, like I do ethics and he does campaign finance, and he's actually developed his own kind of spreadsheet software that candidates can use. And he does a fair amount of hand-holding to make sure everybody, properly reports everything. So, it is, I think it is a fair amount of work that would fall, on the board as probably currently structured, where they may need staff help. But it is an undertaking, but it can be done. I don't know what kind of impact it has on, the number of candidates they have. You might talk to your colleagues over there to see if they can see how it affects it.
Great.
I think
Thank
there's
you so
definitely,
much. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think there's definitely an aspect of candidate preparation and training that could be done, and that we've discussed about providing information about changes that would take place as a result of these. So on the right-of-way issue, how can we make that more clear? On candidate reporting, how do we make that more clear for candidates? And that's something that would go along with any changes that are made to the code and charter.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, our last work session this evening. This was something that we have a number of work sessions that came out of our budget discussions. Already we looked at and reviewed our budget process over the last year, and now we're doing the second of these work sessions, which is a personnel compensation overview. And I'm going to turn it over to our city manager.
Thank you very much. So during the deliberations of the budget, there were a number of questions raised about how personnel compensation is calculated, particularly since personnel costs comprise approximately 60% of the general fund expenditures. So it's a big portion of the city's budget, and we recognize that. One of the things that I got a sense by some of the questions were people wondering if the personnel system was somewhat arbitrary, if, was it fair? How were the wages identified? All of that kind of thing. Do we have superfluous staff? Those kinds of questions. And I'm happy to go over briefly an overview. Just as personnel expenses take 60% of our budget, they probably take at least 60% of our time to identify and work with staff and make sure that things are handled in a systematic way, with an eye to fairness, and with being responsible for our employees and with city taxpayer money. So there's several factors that are involved when we go through the budgeting process. We look at the number and the types of the positions that we determine are needed to provide city services. We have to look to the provisions of labor laws, the city code, council resolutions, and the two collective bargaining agreements with the city's unions regarding wages, benefits, and working conditions. We look at the wage scales of the entities with whom we compete to attract and retain employees. So we want to get the best employees. We want to pay them fairly. We recognize that other jurisdictions also want those employees, and so we have to think about that. There's a cost and array of employee benefits, and so we look, do we have the right mix of those benefits, and that includes retirement plans, particularly for police. We also have to look in the budgeting process about the impact of accidents and illness on our health insurance and on our workers' compensation costs, because those are large ticket items, and there's a certain amount of this we can control. So added to your package and in the orange section is kind of a walkthrough about addressing these various items. On the number and types of positions that we determine are needed to provide city services, obviously there's lots of discussion during budget time about that, particularly about the kind of services the council wants to see, how much staff time is required to do that, and does that make sense? Certainly there are some positions and counts of positions that stay the same from year to year. I give the example of trash collection routes. There's X number of trash collection routes. You need at least 2 people on a truck, so you can just count them up. Those pretty much keep those same sanitation positions every year. We have in the past cut back on the number of staff on a truck. We have changed years ago, just before I think I started, there was twice a week trash pickup. So, there have been changes over the years, so even those things that seem standard can change. There are some positions that change all the time. Our temporary, part-time, and intern positions vary a lot. And it can be by the recreation programming events, where you need some rec staff for a large event. It can, there may be some temporary special projects that you want to have an intern on, or some consultant kind of position, temporary position. And so that tends to be something that we really do talk about at budget time, about the different kinds of array of programs and special projects that there are. Other permanent positions vary less often, and so we have a certain number of positions in finance, and a certain number of positions in planning, and a certain number of positions in police. And we tend not to just hire people or get rid of people on a whim at the end of a year. But if we have to, obviously, because of budget issues or council direction, we will. But more often we are looking at how can we change when there's a vacancy, or when there's a new technology, or when there's an opportunity to do some restructuring, to best match people with the jobs that need to be done. So we actually have a lot of discussion about that as we're preparing the budget. When we're having our internal meetings with department heads and staff, we go through that pretty rigorously. In fact, our HR director spends some time at the very beginning of our budget process each year, meeting with each of the divisions to get a sense. Well, who might be leaving? Somebody close to retirement? You getting a hint about that? Somebody's too overworked and the job's not getting done, maybe we need help. So those are the kind of discussions that are done early on as we're feeling this out. As I was preparing for this item, I was looking over our various titles of our permanent positions. We have 91 different titles. Of those, 68 represent just one employee. So that goes to my point earlier about our budget specialist. We have a budget specialist. When she's gone, we have to, fill that position. Other people can kind of fill in, but it's not their expertise, and it's in addition to the other duties that they have. So it's only in Public Works and in police that there's multiple people with the same job title. It doesn't mean there's a lot of them, but there's at least that ability to move some folks around. And as I mentioned, recommended changes then are part of the budget discussion with the council each year. As we think about this, though, we also have to be really attuned to labor law. What hours can somebody work? We look at what does something mean in terms of implying having to pay overtime. Is that the right way to structure a job, that you end up paying a lot of overtime? Maybe there's a different approach to that. We look at city laws, and we look at the collective bargaining agreements, and we look at minimum wage rules and the decisions that the council has made to pay livable wages, to not pay any permanent employee less than $40,000 a year. We give full health insurance for employees. That is a big deal. And we pay 80% of dependent care. That is a big deal. As I noted on the cover page, those items really help meet our race equity goals for personnel, because people, particularly that are not white, have disparate health outcomes, and to be able to not have to be contributing funds to that really does attract and keep employees. As I just had started with the city, just been here a few years, the council changed to a pay system that looked at area market wages. Before that, the council had a provision, had a policy that they couldn't pay area wages, so they were just going to pay somebody to get their foot into a profession and then move on. And the expectation is that people would only stay 5 years. Oh, we're a great place to work, the people didn't leave, but they were getting paid really lousy. And so we really did have to overhaul that system. And as part of that, we did look at area market wages, and with additional compensation for employees who earned the rating of distinguished on their evaluations. In the early years of this program, in the collective bargaining agreements, the minimum annual increase was 3%. We're nowhere near that now. When the recession hit, we laid off people. We said, you know what? We won't go below 0% increase. So if the market went down, we still wouldn't cut people's wages, but that we couldn't just guarantee a floor of 3%. And instead, we really look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics Employment Index for wages only, as opposed to what you were looking at of wages and benefits for state and local government workers. And that's kind of our proxy for a base annual increase. And this year it's 2.4%. As I mentioned, in 2015, the council directed that no full-time employee earn a salary less than $40,000, and we have worked that into our wage structure. It means that lower-level positions in the city are paid at higher than market wages. It also means that positions just above it had to be raised up again, so you didn't have drivers and the folks on the truck getting paid the same. You had to show, because they have different skill levels and that kind of, you had to like bump things up a little bit. So that not having bumped it up is called compression. We had to deal with that. So there's some internal equity we had to go through on the wage scales. Councilwoman Dabala said, you know, what's the grid look like? And, you know, we have a big grid of grades and steps. It's in little tiny print, but it really does show for this type of position, you're at a grade, depending on where your levels of skill are, you're put at a step. You move up a step generally at the end of the year, and if you get a distinguished, you get an additional step. Now that's a discussion point during wage negotiations. It doesn't have to be like that, but that is a system that we've had for the last few years. It's understandable. People know how to look on the spreadsheet. They need to see where they are. They know that provided they do a decent job, they move up to the next step. But besides the collective bargaining agreements and that $40,000 provision, in 2007, the council required that no part-time or contractual employee be retained in an ongoing way in lieu of having a permanent position and not getting benefits. And we had some of those. And so one of the things that we do when we sit down in that budget period is we go through and, you know, you've been hired, you've been using this isn't a temporary job. You guys have gotten to live with, this is part of your normal systems now. We're going to need to make it a permanent position, or we're going to need to restructure. And so that's part of the discussion that we have each year. When we look at, and to say, I will say that we still have some temporary part-time intern and contract positions for certain needs, and they're still valuable. But we do pay a lot of attention to them to make sure that they're not being exploited, essentially. The collective bargaining agreement identifies 8 jurisdictions with whom we are to compare wages. Those are Rockville, Gaithersburg, Greenbelt, Hyattsville, College Park, Annapolis, Bowie, and Laurel. So we do a compensation and classification study every 3 years. Part of the compensation study is to identify comparable positions from those in Tacoma Park with those of our 8 jurisdictions, and see are our wage scales for those positions in line with those other 8 jurisdictions. We shared that during this budget process some. We have that information. We're still reviewing it as part of, we're going into wage negotiations with the unions. But one of the things that we're required to do, and it makes sense, is to see how do we stack up against our competitors. There are a couple positions that we really need to look to Montgomery County and Prince George's County for positions, for wages. Librarians. There's not librarians in these other municipalities. They're county librarians. For police, we recognize who our competitors are, and some of the county police are our competitors. And for department head positions or other specialty positions, we look at those. I can say we cannot match Montgomery County most of the time. We just can't. It's helpful for us to know that we have that competition. And so it's informational, but it's also, we have to look, again, with kind of internal equity, with what our other staff are making, what's a reasonable approach for a department head, what's a reasonable approach for a librarian, given that we're not a county government. Similarly, we look at our benefits packages, because some people really look at benefits. Most employees don't. Most employees get hired they are attracted to a job because of the wage. They look at the salary first. Sometimes we have to do an extra selling job to say, please look at our benefits package, because it's excellent. And particularly it's excellent in terms of the health benefits. The city spends over $2 million a year paying health insurance for employees. Our other benefits are similar to the other jurisdictions. I've included in some background information that you have, life insurance and tuition payments and a variety of kinds of things that you would get as benefits for a job. But particularly with police agencies, we're a little bit lower than many of our competitors. We do not pay retiree health care. And that is something that police normally get in other jurisdictions. Also, many jurisdictions allow police officers to retire before the 25 years that they're eligible for in Tacoma Park. We used to have 30 years. We did move it down to 25, but it's still different than some jurisdictions which have 20-year employment, although there is a trend to go back up to 25 in some of the other jurisdictions. Most employees participate in the Maryland retirement program, some not the police, but most of the other staff. Generally, we're required to, as employees, pay a contribution of 7%, and then we pay a contribution as a city. The city's contribution is set by the state program, and we pay about $600,000 a year for the Maryland State Retirement. Police officers participate in the city's retirement program. They also pay 7% of employee contribution. But because it's a young program and they're police, we pay a lot of money every year based on the actuarially identified amount. And, we're in the $1.2 million contribution for our 44 officers. One of the things that's nice is that the police retirement program is overseen by our city's pension board, which is very good and has 2 outstanding citizens that help Bird Dog the best approach to keeping that plan solvent, healthy, reasonable. One of the other things that we do is look at the impact of accidents and illness on personnel compensation costs. We can do a lot of risk management things to minimize accidents. We can try to do healthy employee activities to keep people healthy. But, you know, having cancer in my family, you know, thank God for health insurance, and it costs money, and it has an impact on the quotes for the various systems, depending on what the mix of the workers are. Because we're relatively a small organization, a couple major expensive illnesses or something could make a difference on our quotes. That's particularly the case with workers' compensation. How we do on accidents makes a huge difference on our workers' compensation quote. And that's something that I was happy this year. Our amount went down a little bit. For several years it had gone up, so I was glad to see that we're trying to, I think, look carefully at risk management to help reduce that. Because we have public works and police, which are in risky type positions, those costs just naturally are high. Officers get hurt, public works guys get hurt, and so even if they don't get hurt, the anticipation is that they will, so our costs are high. So again, with budget preparation, the beginning of the budget year, we go around, we look and see what are the needs, we identify for each division the likely employees in that division, and then we have a couple extra ones in case we're still trying to decide, are we going to ask to add a physician or something. We have an enormous spreadsheet that includes the cost of insurance for that actual person, because we know what they've been having. If it's a vacant position, we pick kind of an average amount. So we put in an amount for health insurance, an additional amount for what we might think might come for, because we don't get the quotes for health insurance till June 1. So we're, you know, it's always right at the last. Sometimes we can get a little bit earlier within the month, but we pretty much have to be well on our way for the budget before we get the actual quotes. We give an estimated amount for how many people might get distinguished. We have kind of a little escalator on that. And then, at all the times, we look at what are the council priorities. Is this the right mix of positions and effort to what you all want for your council priorities? We also have some monies in the non-departmental section of the budget. In the non-departmental section, we have tuition assistance. We have a nice program, and we've been able to allow a number of people to get their college degrees while they're, or a graduate degree, going to class outside of work. And I'll just mention how important that is, particularly for our police, because as I said, we're not necessarily competitive to some of our surrounding jurisdictions, but we don't require a college degree for a police officer. But we encourage them to get it. And so we make those funds available. We work with them to be able to attend the classes and move forward that way. Some of the surrounding jurisdictions do require a college degree, and so, you know, that's part of the reason that we're able to get some officers that otherwise would go somewhere else. We also budget for employee recruitment and assistance, and for the legal costs of labor negotiations and lawsuits related to personnel. All that adds up, but I have to say that I feel that it's very systematic, it's very carefully thought through. I think any really good organization would have something very comparable to what we have, and our just gone HR director did a good job getting all of this into spreadsheets that were very helpful in analyzing what's working and what kind of estimates we can do. And so part of the thing is to do some projections. Then she will run projections. If we If we had all the positions that I might have dreamed of for a year, so show us what the costs of that are. If we can kind of do some estimates of out years, given those, and what we think is a likely increase each year, and we look at that. It doesn't take very long until it's really speculative. So just, we look at it, but that's it, because we have a lot of detailed information about particular people, it's pretty helpful. If you look at the county government, they've got thousands of employees. They just do estimates. Here's a typical person with this position, gets this amount, has this estimated amount of workers' comp and Social Security and health benefits, et cetera. And the actual difference of any one person doesn't make a whole lot of difference to the bottom line. With us, it does. If you got somebody that's got some other kind of extra health coverage for a large family or something, it's going to add more to a division of 5 people. And so sometimes it does make a difference, and we have to be that specific. But it's the same concept and the same process. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great, thank you for that overview. Anyone have any questions? Councilman Jamal?
I see Terry also. Yeah, thanks for letting me start off, since I think I'm the one that started asking for this first. And I wanted to do 2 things, and one was to make sure that we all and residents who are interested have a chance to understand what this overall structure is and how it works and how costs get estimated, and also to look together outside of the pressure of the budget moment at how to best manage costs going forward. So just to summarize, if I understood you, there is a wage table.
Right.
And the one that's posted online is
from the current
of,
year. It's not from the one we're considering for FY20.
Right. It's the one for the current year. I was just about to say that it's dated October 2018.
Right.
So if anybody really wants to see it, there it is.
Okay.
And then we have 2 unions.
Correct.
And about how many of the total?
There's about, I think there's about 85 members of ASCME and about 25 members of Local 400, which is the police officers under the grade of sergeant.
Right, and the police contract is up next year.
So both of the contracts will be up next year. We have wage negotiations this month.
Starting this month.
Just for, but not the whole, we don't have a whole open contract. We just talk wages for FY20, and that's happening now.
Okay, so we have the 2 unions, the collective bargaining with the 2 groups, and they are a good chunk of the total number of employees.
That's right.
And the wage table, every year the entire table goes up because of the...
So it depends.
Okay.
With some of the discussions. The way that it's normally done is that in a year such as this year, when there's a compensation and classification study, you get a new table, you get kind of set things new because you're comparing to market wages. As a proxy, in between, we do that ECI increase of the numbers in the table, and then and look at that. So we try to do an estimate about how market wages may have changed without doing a full study.
So the entire table moves up a little bit each year. So a person who has an average evaluation, they would get a little bit of an increase because of cost of living.
Yes, the ECI.
Based on the ECI. And then if they get a good evaluation, they get a step up, so they get a little reward for having done a good job. And so in general, that's how we wind up with...
I will say it differs many different years, but a standard process is that the table's adjusted, and then all employees get a step up because with the assumption that they have had a year's worth of more education and professional development in their job, and they get an additional step if they get distinguished. And what that does is it better accommodates a recognition of seniority in a position. We had problems with that before by not showing that, and then we were getting people out of whack with the market. So we look at that pretty carefully. So we adjust the scale a little bit. We allow one step generally for a regular person, and somebody that gets distinguished gets two.
Okay, so,
And the steps in the past year were 1.25%. So they're very modest. But there's something.
and it all adds up, right? And then we get a budget table and people freak out. So I'm just trying to break down the pieces. And then you said that because of the collective bargaining agreements, we do a compensation classification study every 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that during the budget process, you gave us some of that information.
Right.
I'm wondering if it would help to post something online, because I just looked in, there isn't anything.
Right, because we're still in wage negotiations, and there may be some adjustments that come out as part of those discussions, something we didn't catch or a different way to perceive something. So that's something that, it's not final.
The compensation information about other communities is
No,
not final?
So in general, I think that could be shared, but I will just identify that sometimes people have a question and say, that's not really the same position. Or, so there's some questions that come up about those things.
What I'm asking is if we can have the information about other similar positions that you collect, not the analysis of what does it mean for this community and this position versus that position. And I understand that that's negotiated during the agreements, but the base information might be something that could be posted.
I will just want to check with a labor attorney about
Okay,
it.
that's good.
It'll be public very soon, but I'm just a little bit nervous about it. Yes, ma'am?
So that's how we, and then as you said on benefits, so the salaries are roughly, the salary ranges are roughly comparable to similar jobs in other communities, with a couple of exceptions, as you say. Can't compare Rockville Librarian, they don't have one. So you compare instead to a county position.
Or you
is very
compare it
helpful.
to a job, a different kind of professional job with a similar level of education and skill, so that there's some kind of a comparison about that kind of, the factors that go into rating a position. This goes to the point where I can't pay what the county pays.
Well,
But I can
didn't ask you
pay
to.
something that's comparable, a position that has the same kind of level of education and skill levels. Those things can be calculated, and you can say it's about the same level of skill and activity as this other kind of professional position, and it would be in that same grade.
Okay, I was actually going to turn to talking about the benefits.
Sure.
So the wages are, most of the categories, most of the wage ranges are based on similar positions in communities.
That's right.
And the one place where we stand out on benefits is health.
That's correct.
And so I know you've made some efforts to control healthcare costs. And maybe you'd like to go into that a little bit.
So a couple things. Every year we look, because healthcare is such an expensive
Yes.
component of our system. For years we changed what the copays are. We discourage people from going to an emergency department rather than urgent care. There's some of that. But where we've been able to make a little bit more headway is adjusting our drug payments, our prescription drug payments, and opening opportunities for a health savings account program, which, especially for younger employees and new families, is very helpful for them. And that's become more and more popular, and that saves money. And
So-
as part of those HSAs, we give a good amount of money to get the pot started for the new employee, for the employee that signs up for that, so that they're not doing out-of-pocket money first before the caps go in. So, because in the long run, which is only in about a year, it saves us money with the health insurance.
So, three more things. One is just again, a summary statement. So each employee is evaluated, is rated, and that by their supervisor, and that feeds into this personnel system of who gets
That's right.
the extra bump, that gets the extra grade.
That's correct.
Step up or not. And on management salaries, do you do anything different, or do you have the same system for management salaries? And then I have one last question.
It varies. It varies. We generally, for years, our management salaries were too low compared to our competitive municipalities. Now they're about in the right wage range. So that's something we look at. But in general, we've kept pretty close to the same system because it's understandable for people.
And how over...
I'm sorry, but we do provide for management level positions. We have additional health care. We have free dependent health care as opposed to city pays that. That's to help offset the fact that they don't get overtime. Once you're into a certain level, you're not getting overtime pay and a variety of things. So there are some special benefits for those who reach the supervisory management level of
Yeah, I was
positions.
thinking more specifically about the salary piece.
Not about salaries.
And the last question that I wanted to ask generally was how are you managing personnel costs? They are a big chunk of the budget. They do have a tendency to rise faster than most other things, and you've been doing a number of things to manage them. And so, would you like to say a few words about that?
I mean, I think I'm very proud about how the city has managed personnel costs because we huge increases. We really are modest about it, and if we just don't do the kind of increases Montgomery County does, we've resisted, and that has paid off in general. The county ended up having way too much money in its personnel, and they had to do some bigger cuts. Now, when we went through the recession, we had to actually lay off more people than the county laid off, but that's because we're small. But I feel that we've been very responsible about modest increases and looking at our competitors' municipalities.
So you gave also an example of the accident management and more attention to preventive health care.
There's that.
All right. Well,
But I also think, just because somebody wants some money, we don't give it to them. And sometimes we don't hire somebody who is demanding a very high salary. And that's the place where the balance is a tough one. And if somebody is a superstar, we have to really decide, do we want to go a little bit higher than we would normally offer a position to get this person? And sometimes we don't. A couple times we have gone higher, and we end up with people that I really value and have brought in lots of grant money and have made different impacts on the city. But there have been plenty of times when I've said we can't afford this person. And so that's just day-to-day efficiency.
Okay, thank you for your time. Sorry, Terry.
I have one question, and that is, when you mentioned the looking at other jurisdictions, and you have a list of jurisdictions that are in the contract, the union contract. Some people might look at that and say, well, gee, some of those jurisdictions are quite different than Tacoma Park. They have much bigger budgets. Could you explain why that's a fair way of doing it?
I don't know how those 8 got into the union contracts at the beginning, but they are ones that we often compete against for hiring new staff. So even if they have different kinds of budgets and different systems, if we're hiring a sanitation driver, they may very well be looking at at those same jurisdictions for jobs. So it actually does seem to be, when we're looking for employees, that they're looking at those areas too, those cities as well, for positions. I'm open to a different look, but it's actually worked pretty well.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Councilman Costa.
Thank you. Just two relatively quick questions. One is, I just was looking at the numbers, and I don't know if I'm looking at this correctly or incorrectly, but in the budget for FY20, there's a total of about 172 full-time equivalents, and then the number you gave in this documentation is the 91 different titles for permanent positions.
Right.
So is the difference between those part-time staff, temporary staff?
So so we have, so the number that you listed, the number that you gave, the 177 or whatever, that's at full-time equivalents. So it can be different part-time positions, a variety of things. Then we have people that don't count into that. They're just a few hours here and there for part-time work. There are interns, some things that don't fall into that category. Also, if you note on the cover sheet, when I talk about race equity considerations, we have 237 actual people that in some way during the course of the year are on our payroll. Not all of them are there for very long, but it is a variety of ways of counting numbers of employees.
And then my other question was, you mentioned it a little bit with regard to the tuition assistance, but in what ways is the city differentiating itself to attract employees? Because we can't pay in a way that really competes with the county or with DC government or those larger entities. So are there ways that the city is marketing itself and benefits of working for a small jurisdiction or a small department in terms of autonomy or creativity and additional benefits that exist?
So it's not so much by wages or benefits, although the health benefits for some people can be important. The main thing is that it's cool to work for Tacoma Park. People can have some autonomy and work on individual projects, activity. They can get credit for their job as opposed to being an anonymous member of a transportation team. They can get in trouble publicly too. So there are folks for whom working for Tacoma Park is not appropriate because the criticisms would be too harsh. But we also have such a good mix of staff that when you have good staff, they feed off of each other and it gets exciting. And so, and it's never boring. Unless there's a few jobs that you do the same thing every day. Most jobs you do not. Most jobs, you don't know exactly what you're walking into when you want to get in the door that day.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you so much. This has been really, really helpful. And I just have more of a comment. So I do want to encourage people to keep in mind the current labor market and the fact that unemployment is low. And so what that means is that when jobs are available, people are hiring, they are hiring fast, and they're paying a lot of money.
That's right.
And we just need to keep that in mind, that the market that existed maybe 5 years ago during the recession as of right now is different.
Right.
And it is very competitive to recruit and retain talent. I love the fact that we do tuition reimbursement and tuition assistance. I think those are great tools to not just recruit people, but to actually recruit younger people to groom longer, because there's a bit of a longer tail and you may not have as much attrition that way. So I definitely think that it's important for us to keep in mind the various factors that come into play when someone decides to work somewhere.
Right.
And I do think it's important for us to also think about when we start talking about the Housing and Economic Strategic Plan and to think about affordability, but also quality of housing.
Right.
And ensuring that we have high-quality housing stock available so that people can live and work here. Those are also selling points. I love the neighborhood, I can walk to work, you know, those kinds of things. So I appreciate all of the information in terms of pay, of salaries, but I do think it's important for people to understand that the labor market that we're dealing with is different.
And frankly, recently, it has been a little bit tough on that. I will say that one of the other benefits that we're considering, and we're not there yet, is some paying off of college loans. You know, that would be one of those areas where if you're trying to attract some younger people, that there may be something that works with that. You know, so there's that. There have been opportunities in the past to get some money towards housing. So there are some things that we can explore, but it's money, and so we just have to figure out that mix and what makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Great.
I just want to actually piggyback on what Councilwoman Searcy said, and there's a story in Bethesda Magazine regarding the county that shows a report of 45% of county employees living outside of Montgomery County right now, and a lot of it has to do with the cost of living, not in the county overall. And so I think it's an issue we have in Tacoma Park. I think it's an issue the county also has. And I do like the idea of us looking at exploring some different things that we can do. And you know, and this is another reason why I hope things like ADUs go through at the county council level, because it does give us another option for maybe some of our potential staff in the future. Councilmember Kovar, did you have anything to add?
Just a few things. Yeah, thanks. And thank you for the presentation. To me, we want to pay a fair wage. We're in a competitive environment, as a number of my colleagues have said, but then we have to try to be good stewards of the public funding. And so I think what residents often look at are two things: how we compare to other communities that are similarly situated, and then how many or what kinds of specific positions do we have for certain tasks. So it's one thing to say, hey, we're, you know, similar, you know, maybe not in population, but in other ways to Rockville, or very close in population to Hyattsville. And so we can compare pay between two positions that are similar, you know, other than in the library kind of situation. But then it's also, should we have as many people doing X? And I think part of the problem is when the comparisons are done, it usually just looks at one thing. And so it's like, well, here's the number of people we have in police. Look at what Rockville has. Yeah, but Rockville gets some of it from the county, or whatever the case is, you know, because of the certain things that the county does. And so, I mean, I'd almost like to see, and, you know, I hesitate to ask for a lot of additional work to be done there, but if we take these 8 other communities and try to find a way in a chart that people could look at to show comparisons of specific positions, but also numbers of employees, but also, you know, what are the median incomes like in these different places, and what are the tax rates like? Because all those things together will give a true picture of it. I think people tend to just look at one thing that they can pull out and say, this seems off. Well, it's off because of some other factor. And so I don't know if it's possible to compare a master list that would kind of really, for the 8 communities and us, show some of these things. But otherwise, it feels like we're only seeing one piece of it, not getting the whole picture.
Well, there is that. We look really carefully, but there are some things that like any necessarily in a community
because we're competing
for jobs. And so some of that stuff is important to see it, because you're thinking about, well, what impact does that have on a tax rate? That's important, but it doesn't make a difference in terms of salary.
But so how do you decide whether we have the right number of people?
So in almost every single position, we have fewer people in that department or area of expertise than the other jurisdictions that offer that service. We are so thin on the number of people. You know, other places will have 8 people in a budget office and we have 2. And, you know, it's just,
But see, that's a type of comparison that probably we haven't seen as much of, and maybe that would help. And, you know, you'd
Yeah.
expect Rockville maybe to have more people than we would, but showing the population and the comparison, that would help people be able to assess, do we have the right number of people? I mean, you can't have less than one.
well, and
Like
that's,
we
and frankly,
budget,
that's,
but-
and that's actually the point. We can't have less than one person.
Right.
And so we actually have a staff and an array of services for a larger community. Okay, so we could get more people and not have to increase the staff as much. If the population of the city all of a sudden was 22,000 instead of 17.5 or something, it's probably not going to make any changes, maybe a couple police officers, but it's probably not going to make much change. You just need one finance director. You just need, you know, I mean, it's just, so part of it is that the phrase that Chuck Bean had said, you know, we hit above our, whatever. We provide a lot of services. Ultimately, it comes down to the fact that we provide a lot of services for a very small jurisdiction. And so we do need a person. We can't have half a person. But what we do have often are people that wear multiple hats. So people say, well, get rid of the sanitation unit because then you can contract with trash service. But then who's going to drive the snowplows? And who's going to help with something else? So we have these differing ways that we've made better use of the folks over time to save money. And so it's always good to poke it. It's always good to see, does this still make sense? Is there a technological change? Is there not a need for a service? But we've also tried to keep the same person and see how else can we use them. And
So I
so it
think-
does make it, I'm just saying, the reason I'm saying that is that when we've tried to compare ourselves to, say, Greenbelt, it doesn't always work because then Greenbelt uses their people for this plus that over there, while we
Right.
use those people for this plus this. And it just needs a lot of asterisks and stuff when you do it.
Yeah, there may be a few comparisons that I might ask for, but understanding that it's not a perfect way of doing it.
Right, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I do just want to say that I think when we're talking about staff, like, we are just a very labor-heavy workforce.
Yeah.
Where we have a lot of things and projects that require people. And it's not necessarily like a specific grant project or some kind of project-based thing. It's just really labor-intensive. So if we are thinking about trying to compare how we allocate staff, it's difficult to compare that to another jurisdiction. We actually need to have a more robust discussion about our current services and the need for those services and whether or not we want to continue to provide them. And I think that's the harder, it's really easy to say we need to cut 10 people because we don't want to pay for them. It's a lot harder to say we need to cut these types of services because they require 3 people and we don't want to pay for them.
Well, right.
And I think that's the piece that in many cases, when you really poke the bear with some of the feedback you would get from residents, it is, I don't want to pay as many taxes, but I also don't want you to stop responding to me in the way you have been. And that's a double edge. You can't do both. You got to pick your poison. So if the idea is through this process, we are trying to identify ways to not just allocate where people are spending their time, because I mean we can come up with ways to do that, but to come up with some prioritization in terms of staffing allocations, then we need to have some hard discussions about what we're willing to give up.
Right, well, I think a good example of that is the policing, because I think I mentioned a few weeks back that in one of the smaller streets on Hodges Lane, which is, you know, a dead end over by the elementary school, a 2-block long dead end, there had been a series of these car break-ins just week after week, and someone was caught there by the police at like 2:30 in the morning. They had a stakeout going on, and I think as a result of that, it's cut back some. And I'm not saying there still aren't car break-ins happening in the city, but I mean, the county police are not going to do that for us. They're not going to. They're not going to put someone on Hodges Lane at 2:30 in the morning. And so, yes, we could save money by going with the county or in some other way getting our policing, but we don't just get the same services, and I think that's the point. And possibly, if we got rid of the police, the county would have to hire more police, and then other, we'd all,
And they're not gonna do
right.
that.
Or if they did, they'd make us all pay more in taxes. So, and I know the police is a big chunk, but I think that, you know, it's fine. We should have those discussions, but it's not like it's just free to give up on some of these things, I think, right?
And I do think, and maybe we'll wrap on this, I will take the mayor's prerogative here and say, it is also about what are our values and why do we live in a municipality, in a city, and what keeps us to live those values. The fact that we can be a sanctuary city, the fact that we can have a police department that is doing things like, conflict mediation and other things that the county is not doing. It means that we are banning plastic straws, doing Safe Grow, and doing all these things way before the county does. And so I think it's also weighing how much do we want to be that cutting edge, innovative community, and quite frankly, that costs money. It costs money in the staff who's going to help us figure out the programs, put the programs in place. It means having a sustainability manager if we're going to have a climate change and declare a climate change emergency and work towards that, because we can declare it all we want to do, but to actually get the work done, we need to have the staff in the city to do it. And so I also think we have to have a hard conversation about what it means to actually live in Tacoma Park and live by these values. And I think with that, we're going to now move on to our convene in a closed session. The City Council is scheduled to vote to go into a closed session to discuss matters related to collective bargaining negotiation. The session will be closed pursuant to Annotated Code of Maryland, General Provisions, Article Section 3-305B9. The council will not reconvene in public after the session. May I have someone to move to go into closed session? Councilwoman DeBala moved. Councilwoman Searcy second. All those in favor to go into closed session, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right, we're going to go into closed session.
All right.